Cool Figure TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. No way out for Trump except total defeat. Iran versus U.S. and Israel update. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Where Trump is losing his mind. I'm hearing he's been rushed out of the White House. He's medical problems. He's under severe stress because he's losing horribly. Let's get into the update and the content. Salute. No good news.
This is no ordinary routine. The U.S. has quietly flooded Israel with dozens of heavy military aircraft and fuel supplies, landing at Ben Gurion Airport. Military sources reported that at least 25 U.S. refueling aircraft and military transport planes landed in Tel Aviv on April 24, amid Trump's push for talks with Iran. This has never happened before, not even at the start of a war, indicating preparations for war, open preparations for the next round of conflict, while the region holds its breath. Meanwhile, a large number of U.S. Air Force transport planes heading to the Middle East have continued in full force from the night of April 24 through today. Some military aircraft have flown through Europe, delivering additional equipment there. It seems nothing is new for Trump, who is following the same scenario, all accompanied by the deployment of military forces. The United Arab Emirates has granted the U.S. permission to station a significant Air Force contingent on its territory, amassing troops at Al Dhafra Air Base. Satellite imagery shows 12 F/A-18 fighter jets stationed at the base. Imagery from April 20 also shows 7 aerial refueling aircraft and 1 C-17 transport aircraft. But Iran has never trusted the theatrical bluffs of ceasefires, and is prepared for the terms that will be dictated in Islamabad or on the kinetic battlefield. Currently, IRGC is relocating some of its heavy missiles amid escalating tensions stemming from the U.S., and is preparing to face the next phase of the war, which is clearly looming on the horizon. This time, IRGC promises a major surprise, something new and unprecedented in warfare anywhere in the world. John Mearsheimer, a renowned American political theorist, has stated, "Iranians are extremely nationalistic and will never raise their hands in surrender. They will fight to the end," and in his view, the U.S. lacks a winning strategy in the event of war.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.
An Iranian harsh retaliation on the U.S. IRGC speedboats raided and boarded the big MSC cargo ships in the Strait of Hormuz, and overpowered them. This comes after the U.S. Navy previously stopped 3 Iranian vessels, seizing one of them, amid tensions in the critical waterway. On April 23, 2026, IRGC released a video containing the process of confiscating a giant cargo ship belonging to the service airline MSC, where the ship was carrying cargo belonging to the U.S. and Israel. Iran seized 2 MSC ships, the Greek ship Epaminondas and the Swiss ship Francesca. Shortly after, they targeted a third UAE ship, forcing it to turn around and anchor in UAE. IRGC said, the ships had threatened maritime security by operating without the necessary permits, and by tampering with navigation systems. Footage shows how IRGC Navy Special Forces boarded the cargo ships in a fast and accurate manner, where masked commandos boarded 2 cargo ships and managed to seize them. At least 15 Filipino sailors are currently detained, but said they were safe and unharmed, with families informed and receiving government support. This happened just hours after Trump announced an extension of the ceasefire, which received no response from Iran. Islamabad peace talks collapsed last week, and Iran now charges a toll of more than $1 million per ship to pass through its own waterways. This confiscation process was carried out with Hadar 110, the fastest operational military boat in the world, with a speed of 203 kilometers per hour. Hadar 110 moved silently, surpassing all warships, a technology that shocked the West. They were able to launch anti-ship missiles against disobedient ships. Although the speedboats were small, they involved up to 30 more participants during the seizure operation. Trump raved on Truth Social, "I have ordered the U.S. Navy to shoot and kill any ship, even a small one, that places mines in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Let there be no hesitation." Iranian-flagged vessels continued to operate despite a so-called U.S. maritime blockade, highlighting the limits of law enforcement. Sources assess that the success of this blockade is complicated, and the U.S. sea blockade on Iran is ineffective.
One of the headlines coming out is that the U.S. blockade will last as long as it takes, sort of echoing what President Trump said yesterday, that he's not in any he's not in any hurry. Well, he might want to think about getting in a hurry, because I don't know what any of these guys are talking about when they say we'll just take as long as it takes. You realize blockades can sometimes last years. Look at Cuba. We had a long blockade on that from 1962. I forget how long that physically lasted. And we have an essential blockade that has lasted ever since then. And all of that blockade never brought tiny little Cuba to its knees. And I don't know why we think this one is, as though the Strait of Hormuz there and blocking in the Gulf of Oman is the only way that Iran gets anything, because they have a number of land borders with other countries. So I don't know why you think that that's going to work, because we can't stay, quote, as long as it takes, especially if it starts dragging on into the summer, into the fall, toward the end of the year. Are you kidding me? Have you looked at the price of oil lately? Have you looked at the availability, not even the price, but the availability of jet fuel? There are already thousands, tens of thousands of routes that have been canceled, flights that have been canceled, because there's not enough jet fuel now. Forget about a week from now, or 2 or 3 months from now. You see, everything's going to exacerbate. I mean, how many times do we have to mention urea or fertilizer or helium, and how that impacts even technology? What do you mean we're going to go as long as it takes? Because what is the objective even? As long as it takes to what? For Iran to surrender? I mean, you might want to look at their 8-year war with Iraq, that they never surrendered. They never gave up, no matter how much they suffered. Hundreds of thousands of Iranian men were killed in that war. And you want to now say we're just going to wait until that pressure builds up enough to make you cry uncle, when you have shown that you'll last for years? We can't last for weeks. And there's a lot of people that are, at least some people are sounding that one. We're going to see from in a minute. But let me show you a couple of things else that were said during that press conference that just makes you kind of scratch your head and go, dude, what planet are you looking at? Because you don't seem to be looking at this one. Let's start off with the first one here. This one is just kind of like cringeworthy. Because in the context of this statement here, he's going to, about halfway through it, he's going to point a bony finger at Iran and saying, those darn guys, they're terrible. They're pirates. But listen to what he says right before that.
Not only is the blockade growing, in fact, a second aircraft carrier will join the blockade in just a few days, but this growing blockade is also gone global. Just this week, we seized 2 Iranian dark fleet ships in the Indo-Pacific region that had left Iranian ports before the blockade went into effect. They thought they'd made it out just in time. They did not. We seized their sanctioned ships, and we will seize more. Our blockade is growing and going global. Iran's battered military, the IRGC specifically, has been reduced to a gang of pirates with a flag. They cloak their aggression in slogans, but the world now sees them for what they are, criminals on the high seas. They don't control anything. They're acting like pirates, acting like terrorists. They're the ones who lay indiscriminate mines, who shoot at random ships, who killed 45,000 of their own people, innocent protesters in the course of weeks, their own people. They are the bad actors.
Really? Are they the bad actors? And I'm sorry, it really isn't funny, so I shouldn't be laughing, but it is just anguishing to hear that, because other than maybe his mom, who believes that? I mean, you predicate those 2 clips, by the way, were separated by about 1 minute. So in the minute first part, you brag about how you're interdicting shipping everywhere in the Gulf of the Oman, in that area there, and then other parts of the world, and you're going to keep doing it. You're going to keep this blockade going on. And then 1 minute later, you want to point a finger at the other side and saying, how dare they do the same thing you're doing? And that what they do on the waters, well, that's piracy. But what we're doing, it's a blockade, and ergo it's fine. I mean, come on. I mean, you realize, Mr. Secretary, we're being mocked around the world, and people will look at us with disgust, because other than somebody who's like already drank the Kool-Aid on your side, no one listens to that, man. Nobody believes that. That doesn't make us look better. It doesn't scare Iran. In fact, Iran is just relishing with this, because you're literally handing them incredible opportunity to use your words against America, because they'll spread that to the rest of the world and they'll say, are you serious? This guy brags about seizing ships on the high seas and then has the audacity to call us pirates who are defending our own coastal waterways. You see what I'm saying? Their ability to twist that into something positive for them is like taking candy from a baby. I mean, it's the easiest thing you can have, and he literally hands it to them. And you want to talk about what he did there toward the end of this, that, like the Iranian side, they're the ones that are the bad guys, and they're the bad actors, but we are not doing anything wrong. People all over the world know that the reason why this war started was because of a choice that we made. And in fact, speaking of the choice that we made in the now shifting rationale for the war, remember when this started off, everybody from President Trump to Lindsey Graham to Secretary Hexeth, everybody was talking about this imminent threat. Oh my God, we had to act then. We didn't have a choice because they were 2 weeks away from a bomb, or a week away, as Steve Woodcock at one point breathlessly claimed. Well, now then we're kind of shifting that, because apparently some people are belatedly recognizing that President Trump and Vice President Vance have both subsequently said, look, all the stuff that was all the reprocessed material obliterated in 2025, Operation Midnight Hammer. They brag about that all the time. And then Trump adds in, and we've had our satellites watching that, so we know they haven't done anything to it. So it's still there. People started going, oh, wait a minute. That exposes the lie. Because if it was underneath all this rubble and we've had eyes on it to make sure that it can't even come out, they can't even get at it, then there is a physical impossibility that they were 2 weeks from a weapon. You see what I'm saying right there? There's no way that could be true. So now then we have to go, oh, snap, let's come up with another justification. I know. We didn't start this war on February 28th. They started with us 47 years ago.
The real endless war is the war that Iran has waged on us for 47 years. President Trump is the only president with the guts and moral clarity to finally do something about it. I see it every day behind closed doors. President Trump's fortitude is unshakable and his mission is crystal clear. President Trump said it again yesterday. We have all the time in the world, and we're not anxious for a deal. And I hear him say it every day in private as well. Iran knows that they still have an open window to choose wisely. As we said previously, choose wisely at the negotiating table. All they have to do is abandon a nuclear weapon in meaningful and verifiable ways, or instead they can watch their regime's fragile economic state collapse under the unrelenting pressure of American power.
Okay, this one's even more anguishing to listen to as an American, somebody who loves my country and wants to see us prosper and do well and be respected on the international stage. When you say, well, let's just look at it. First of all, President Trump is crystal clear. Are you kidding me? We're going to do a show actually later this afternoon that talks about, you know, how muddled his message is and all the radically changing things President Trump has done. That's going to be at 2:30 this afternoon. These clear objectives. We'll go into more detail of what that is, but suffice it to say, they are literally all over the map. And it depends not only on what day we're talking about, very frequently it's what time of a day we're talking about, because it'll change again. He's all over the map. So don't tell everybody that he's crystal clear. There's no crystal clarity whatsoever. And then a couple of other things that all Iran has to do is, quote, choose wisely. And then we want to a negotiated trip, negotiations. Okay, who is going to negotiate with America right now? Right now we are faced with the consequences of our absurd actions in the past. So not only did we withdraw from the JCPOA, and as I told you a few times, that's where really the fuse was lit that ended up in this war, because for almost 2 years, the U.S. administration under Barack Obama had painstakingly negotiated an incredibly complex and difficult negotiations with Iran and said, okay, we'll sign this agreement. You'll sign this agreement. If you do all the things in here, reduce your stockpile of nuclear material, reduce how much you can process, or what percentage you can process it up to, then we will do all these other things here. And if you'll allow inspections so people can come and validate and monitor what's going on, then we'll do things like we'll have limited sanctions relief and some other things. We'll have it for a 10-year period. And then if it's in both parties mutual benefit, then we'll extend it on into the future. That sunset clause was critical, because without that, the Iranians wouldn't get it, because they didn't want to get into a situation where, yeah, what if we lock it in forever and then you go back on it? We're stuck into it. So they said, let's have a 10-year time period on it, a 10-year. If everybody had done what they said, then it would have been the easiest thing in the world. They just rolled into another term, because it would have benefited everybody. There wouldn't have been any war. There wouldn't have been any nuclear weapons program. There would continue to be validation that there wasn't. We would be safe. Everything would be fine. But we didn't. So after just 2 years, or 3, President Trump comes in, and because he hates Barack Obama in his name, he gets rid of it. So even though that we had agreed, the United States had agreed to something, here comes another person, says, I don't like it, just get rid of it. Then, and there's a bunch of other things we can talk about, but let's just keep it simple. Then let's get to 2025, where we had been through 5 rounds of negotiations with Iran to again have some kind of a, quote, better deal than the JCPOA. And while there was a plan for a 6th session, then we launched, or Israel rather, in coordination with the U.S., launched a 12-day war, what turned out to be called the 12-day war. And then we, in the midst of that, launched Operation Midnight Hammer to destroy their capabilities. So we said we were negotiating, and then while they were trying to negotiate in good faith, and we went to war with them. And of course, the same thing in this one. This time we were 3 rounds in. They had achieved a tremendous breakthrough, and that's the other part. Hegseth lied there. He said, all we're asking for is to just have you agree to abandon your nuclear weapons program. They did that February 26th, to be specific, at the third round with Steve Witkoff, with the Oman foreign minister as the mediator. They said, we will have zero enrichment. We will get rid of all the reprocessed material that we have. I think they were going to wind it down to zero, so there wouldn't be any, and they wouldn't have any reprocessed material. So they said that they would be willing to do that. So they did the literal thing you asked. There would be inspections that would be able to be verified. Other things were also on the table for the first time, to include long-range missiles and their support for their regional allies. Up to that point, they weren't even on the table. You've heard me say this before too. Critically important here. On a golden platter, everything he claims we're now seeking was handed to us, and we threw it in the trash. Now, what rational view would anyone in Iran, anyone in the world, anyone listening to this now, put yourself in the position of the Iranians? When you had been lied to like that and allegedly been going through negotiations, and you've been attacked twice now, and you had given them already, you had issued a willingness to concede to their requirements and their demands, and they still went to war with you. Upon what basis will you now say, okay, I'm going to release my control of the Strait of Hormuz, we're going to open the thing back up there, and we're going to give you all these other things you ask, and we'll go back to what we already agreed to before? Why would they do that? It would be foolish. I mean, they would be stupid to listen to that now. So we need them to listen to it now, though. Despite the rhetoric and the claim that we can wait as long as it takes is a lie. We can't. I'm about to show you why. And so we need them to do something quick. We need them to believe us, and we need to actually do what we say so that we can get that strait opened up, because we don't have the power to compel them to do so. And now they have every reason not to believe us, and every reason not to do what we say, and every reason to keep the harm building up for us. This is the bitter fruit for our arrogant, foolish decisions of the past, from 2018 all the way up to today. We keep lying and thinking, who cares? We'll do what we want. We're the lion. We're the king of the jungle. If they don't like it, sucks to be them. Get out of here. We're going to do what we want. And by the way, I'm going to come back to you and ask you to do something else that's stupid. It's like a perverse view of the Lucy and Charlie Brown with the ball, football, picking it up, etc. How many times are they going to be stupid? It's one thing if it's a cartoon character, but it doesn't do that in real life when people die because of it. They're not going to do that now. So because of our actions, we have now put in place that any rational human being would not do what we need them to do, not do what they'd already asked for. So that puts us in a really bad position. And one of the reasons why I say he's wrong in saying that we can take as long as it takes and we can stay there forever. And I showed you that when in other blockades, I mean, it could literally be years with an S on it, plural, long time. They can suffer for a long time. They've shown that they have. Well, can we? That's the real problem. John Mearsheimer was on Piers Morgan a couple of days ago and says, yeah, no, we can't.
The economy is of central importance here. And the economy, the international economy, is in deep trouble. And if things get worse, President Trump will be in even more trouble. And I think this is the principal reason that he decided to extend the ceasefire yesterday instead of going back to bombing Iran. President Trump understands full well that if he bombs Iran, Iran will retaliate by completely closing the Strait of Hormuz and shutting down the Red Sea as well. And this will have even further devastating consequences on the international economy. In fact, lots of people are arguing that we're in danger of moving into a world that looks like the Great Depression of the 1930s.
That's right now. And you've shown, I've shown you several experts, economic experts, oil field experts on our show, and they're all coming to that same conclusion. And now there are others like Scott Bessent who say, don't worry about that. There's a great resilience in our banks, whatever. That's along the lines of what Hegseth says. That is divorced from reality. And let me show you something here recently. I think this was from yesterday in Politico. No quick rebound from Hormuz disruption, oil experts tell the Dallas Fed. U.S. oil and gas executives expect traffic through the Strait of Hormuz to be constrained through August. That's if the war was over in the next few days. If this attempt to have a ceasefire turns into permanent and they open up the strait, with little change in U.S. crude output to offset the drop in the Middle East oil. Remember, President Trump has bragged numerous times that, there's like this whole line of ships coming to the United States and we're going to fill up the need. Well, we can't because we don't have the capacity to fill up that need. We have expanded our production to a certain extent, but there's not very much, like I think maybe 2 to 3 million barrels a day, and that can't be sustained over a long period of time to offset the loss of 14 million barrels per day. So that's not going to work. Most of the executives in the survey released Thursday also said that they expected shipping costs from oil from the Persian Gulf to rise even after the U.S. war with Iran ends due to higher insurance costs and tolls. And I was talking to an industry expert, a 45-year executive in the oil industry, who says, listen, it's going to take them a while before the industry, especially the insurance industry, they're going to be saying, okay, let's see how long this lasts. We don't have a good track record of things lasting very long. And the last thing they're going to do is say, okay, a political decision was reached. They signed a piece of paper somewhere in Islamabad. So yay, everyone bum rush to the entrance and the exit. Let's get everything filled up. The tankers coming out, new tankers coming in. They're not going to do that because their livelihoods are on the line. Especially these insurance companies, they operate on surprisingly small margins. So they cannot get into a situation where the risk goes too high or the entire company could collapse, because if they get more requirements for paying out because ships get sunk or burned or attacked or whatever than they have coming in, then their economic model disintegrates. Their economic model is built on accidents happening periodically, not attacks. So they can't have it if Iran should suddenly decide they're going to attack a bunch of ships and burn them up because we're blocking their ships and interdicting them in, I don't know, Indo-PACOM area, hypothetically speaking. You see what I'm saying here? We cannot get into a situation to where we put the onus on the backs, economic onus on the backs of companies, hoping that they'll do something that puts themselves at greater risk. And they're telling the Fed they're not going to do it. And we have some experience with that in the Red Sea, when even after we declared that the operation was done and we're not going to be shooting the Houthis anymore last year, it still took a number of months, plural, before the insurance companies were willing to risk it to go back through. I'm not sure what the situation is now, because apparently that's now coming at risk as well. All of those things combined say that probably if the war's over right away, it'll probably be August before a lot of that gets turned back on. I'm sure that there'll be some small number, but we're not even close to this 100 to 130 ships per day that are going through. I think 2 days ago, there was a single ship that went through. And there's a handful of others, sometimes as many as 20. But that's a fraction of what needs to happen. And right now, with this dual blockade, almost just other than a few squirters and something that penetrates through and goes through a sieve here, that's all that's going through, just individual ships here. It's not enough to offset anything. So the economic problem for America is growing. Thousands of airlines have already canceled flights because they don't have enough jet fuel, especially in Europe. We're not in as bad a situation yet, but they're in a pretty bad situation over there already. You've had, because of helium not getting out, you have problems in Asia because of fertilizers and all kinds of other petrochemicals that are supposed to have to do with agriculture. People are having a problem right now in America, in Australia, in Asia, already, that there's big problems with not having enough fertilizer. So even when they're in the planting season right now, they're paying higher costs, especially with diesel, to get all the farming done. All their inputs are going up. That's going to have an economic impact come when they harvest all of these things later this year. But then there's also the issue of the products themselves, because they don't have enough fertilizer to go around. So they're having to use less than they would, which means that the product and the output is going to be less than it's supposed to be. It'll be somewhere down here. So now we're going to have potential food shortages, and you'll definitely have food price. That's stuff that's going to be all the way through 2027, into 2027 already. And as Professor Mearsheimer correctly talked that there, if this keeps going, it may not be a depression and a real pain. It could be an outright depression, not just a recession. And no one knows how long that could last. So we circle back around. When you hear the Secretary of War saying, you know what, we can do this all day long. We can do this as long as it takes. No, you can't. And God help us if you actually try to do that and think you're just going to sit back and just wait and see what happens. Because, of course, as I showed you in yesterday's show, lots of action's been moving around. Lots of ships been moving around. You've had, well, number one, it could take 6 months to clear the Strait of Hormuz of mines. I forgot to mention that part. That's one of the other things that goes into the problems here. That's aside from the shipping companies themselves. But then you have Katz from Israel, one of the Israeli leaders, saying they're just waiting for a green light to renew the war. And we've shown you, and I think that was actually mentioned this morning in the briefing by General Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that the third aircraft carrier strike group has now arrived with George H.W. Bush. And so there are now three, the Abraham Lincoln and the Gerald R. Ford. So there's a tremendous amount of firepower in the region right now, giving the impression that we're getting ready to do something militarily. And I'll just tell you, you're not going to have that much firepower there and tens, probably around 10, 12,000 ground troops, and just let them sit there while all these economic impacts keep compounding and building up and putting pressure on us. So there's more going on than what we're being told here. And it's hard to believe any of it. And we all go back, and I mentioned a second ago that he's changing, Secretary Hegseth is changing the rationale. It used to be an imminent threat, and then now, well, they have been at war with us for 47 years, and that's, of course, complete and total nonsense. None of those things are true. Everything they've been done in the past has always been in response to something we were doing first. I don't care. Listen, I was on a radio show in New York this morning, got into a pretty heated discussion with the radio host, and I was not backing down from it. The mentality in the U.S. is the Iranian side chants death to America and the great Satan, and they've been killing us for 47 years now that it's just this mantra. No one wants to look at the fundamentals, and I tried to say, look, the original fuse was lit in 1953 when we had a coup against their country and then installed somebody who was exploitive of their country, which caused them on their own to rise up in revolution because they were sick of the oppression that our handpicked guy was causing on them. And then we supported an 8-year war against them. And then in the 2003 Iraq war, when we were attacking the Kataib Hezbollah and several other Shia militia groups inside of Iraq during that war, then they were supporting them just like we're supporting Ukraine. No one wants to hear any of that. No. We don't hear that. We only see the reaction, and then we always characterize it as that's just Iran, like it's out of nowhere doing something to us, and so that justifies what we're doing here. But it doesn't, because forget about this, the untruth of it. It has harm to us. We are the Iran is getting harmed as well. But I care more about the fact that we're harming ourselves with this, because you can't take an action without expecting a human counteraction. And that's what we do. But why would we do that? Why would the United States be doing all these things that harm us, that provide no evidence of any benefit for our country? Why would we do that? Well, when he resigned from his office, Joe Kent, when he left the office of the Director of Intelligence, said that it was because we had become subservient to the Israeli side. Because we know Benjamin Netanyahu's, I've shown you video here from 1986, and then so many times at the United Nations where he held that picture of a bomb and all this kind of stuff that, they're just about to get a bomb. They're right about, it has never been true. It's never been true. It wasn't in 1986. It wasn't in all those times at the United Nations, and it wasn't on the eve of Operation Midnight Hammer. It isn't today. Well, as far as we know, it isn't today. It may be now because we've lost the ability to find out. We no longer have people on the ground, and we gave all that up because of this foolish war here. But at least as of February, that was still not the case. Then why would we go to and start a war here unless it was in the interest of another country, of Israel? And Joe Kent was also on Piers Morgan, and he says, Americans are just kind of sick of this now.
The Americans who voted for Donald Trump, who represent the majority of Republicans, are sick and tired of having these discussions about foreign countries, whether it's Israel or anyone else. But Israel right now has an outsized influence on our foreign policy in the Middle East, which has catapulted us into this current conflict with Iran, which helped drive us into the tragic Iraq war. So look, I think Americans want our government to focus on our problems here in America. Drive around any American city, you're going to see poverty, despair. Those are the issues that people want to focus on. They don't want to focus on, who's running the Israeli cabinet or what the foreign policy preferences are of the Israeli government to drive us into the next series of conflicts.
We don't need any more conflicts. If Israel wants to take a foolish action that'll harm their interest, it'll harm their citizens and get them embroiled in a war like Vietnam, much worse though, because they're a smaller country and they're building enemies all over the region. I've been telling you this since barely after the terrorist attack on 10/7/2023. They were just in responding to a terror attack. Every country is, but they have just been catastrophically wrong in their policies and how they've reacted to it and what they have done since that time. And of course, there's plenty of things that they were doing that built up the seeds even of that prior to it by the oppression and the killing of so many Palestinians before. We'll talk about that another day. But whatever, that's their issue. That's up to them to do. That they want to make foolish decisions that cost them, that's one thing. We should not facilitate it and then get in bed with it to the point to where all this stuff starts falling on us. And let me tell you what the real problem is. There has been a significant cost to this. You saw Professor Mearsheimer there was talking about the economic cost. So that's something that's largely already baked in because of this foolish choice we made to go to war. We need to understand this. Forget about this crap that you're hearing of an imminent threat. There wasn't one. That they were attacking us for 47 years. That's nonsense. That's complete absurd. The historical record is clear on that. It was because, I don't know, President Trump listened to Benjamin Netanyahu. I don't know what his reasons may have been. There may have been a multitude of them. But they were all wrong and they were all bad for America. So now we have this economic impact that's you can't undo that. You can't turn it off. You can mitigate it so it doesn't go from a recession to a depression if you're careful. And we have to hope we haven't gone that too far. But there's also a national security imperative. Let me show you this. This was in the New York Times yesterday under the headline, Iran war has drained U.S. supplies of critical, costly weapons. According to this report, since the Iran war began in late February, the United States has burned through around 1,100 of its long-range stealth cruise missiles for a war that was supposed to be built for China, close to the total number remaining in the U.S. stockpile. Let that sink in for just a second. We have burned through in this absurd war that we chose, that we didn't need to fight, about half of our long-range stealth cruise missiles that we would need should we get into a war. God forbid that we should, and we in fact definitely should not get into war with China, Russia, or any other peer competitor. But now then we've cut in half what we even have if we get into an unexpected Pearl Harbor type. See, if they should take advantage of this and unjustly attack us, we're screwed already because we can barely even sustain a war for a very short period of time. The military has also fired off more than 1,000 Tomahawk cruise missiles, roughly 10 times the number it currently buys each year. Let that sink in too, because those missiles are so costly each, and the production facilities have been designed for peacetime for a long, long time, decades. Is that now we're in war, and that's of course on top of other categories of things we've been doing with with Israel and Ukraine for the last 4+ years. And then here we burn through 10 times the current rate. You can't just turn that on and say, all right, well, let's not bring it up to current status so that we're making 1,000 instead of 100. You just can't do that. It takes years to change that dynamic. And that process hasn't even begun. Continued on, though. That wasn't the end. The Pentagon used more than 1,200 Patriot interceptor missiles in the war at more than $4 million a pop, and more than 1,000 precision strike ATACMS ground-based missiles, leaving inventories worrisomely low. And that's according to Defense Department officials. So let me package that up for you. This is the manifestation of what I was worried about, or rather it's the illustration. The manifestation hasn't happened, and God help us if it does. I said that if we get into a war of choice here, on a war we shouldn't even fight, and we just burn through all of these interceptors on top of what we've been giving away for the last 4+ years in Israel and in Ukraine, then if we get into a war where we need it for our own national security, we won't have it. And now that day is here. And so you hear General Kane this morning talking all this nonsense and braggadocious about how we have all this combat power in the region and we can just flip a switch and then we can bring devastation. And President Trump yesterday claimed without any examination or evidence that we had destroyed 78% of the military targets. Who knows what that number could have been pulled out of thin air, but they claimed that there's around 22% or so left to attack. And that's what we could go in. If we decide to, we can go and hit that last. And then what? That Iran will just cease to exist? 78% didn't bring them to their knees, and you think 22% will? I mean, just on the surface of it, that's absurd. But look at those numbers again. That means we probably couldn't go more than a month and a half of an equal number, an equal density of weapons firing. And we're going to be out of some of those. Now that we're going to be left with a bunch of inertia dumb bombs or lower categories of missiles. And what happens if we get into a war with China then? Or God forbid, if something happens in Europe and we have to go to war with Russia. You've heard me say forever that probably isn't going to happen. But man, you don't want Russia to start going, I can do math too. And man, we've been working for years to get our missile stockpiles, interceptors, drones, long-range missiles, medium range, everything, every category. We've just got this huge stockpile coming up, and you've got nearly none. You don't want them to think like that. And you certainly don't want the Chinese to think like that. China had already built an industrial base that was already, this is not an exaggeration, hundreds, plural, of times, not a percent, especially in shipbuilding and in missiles. And they're miles ahead in missile building and production facilities. Much they could have sustained. They were looking ahead, and they probably also, by the way, also have underground facilities like the Iranians do. So they can survive a lot of the missiles that we would bring in, and they have the capacity to produce them at orders of magnitude higher than we do. And that was if we hadn't done this dumb war, which is one of the reasons I've been writing for many years that we should never fight a war with China over Taiwan, period, no matter what the circumstances, because we can't win it. We can only lose everything. Now then, it's even worse than that. Now they forget about choosing to go and defend Taiwan. Now it's like, what happens if we get attacked? Our capacity has been gravely diminished. So literally, consider this, folks. At this moment, today, on the 24th of April, 2026, we are in a situation to where we have already earned a recession in probably the best case scenario, if we're smart and we get this war over with this weekend, and we just agree to whatever terms we need to get the war over, to get the Strait opened up, and both of these blockades removed. That's if we do that. We already have likely a recession, possibly a severe recession. We also have already we have diminished our stockpiles of weapons that are needed for our national defense. Listen, it doesn't make any difference what your technology is, how many aircraft carriers you have, how many ships you have, how many planes, all these kinds of missiles that we have, how good they are. It doesn't matter how good they are. It only matters how much ammunition you have, how many of these weapons you have. And in a war of attrition, it matters how many interceptors you have and how many offensive missiles that you have. That's the modern warfare when you're talking about a peer-on-peer fight. And right now, both Russia and China are miles ahead of us in both of those categories. And we're down here in the basement. So we need to change our national security policy and wake up and realize that these absurd wars of choice for the benefit of another country have put our national security and our economic security at grave risk. That's the truth of it. So I don't care what kind of nonsense you're hearing from the Secretary of War or from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That's the reality. And you see, I validate everything we're talking about here with credible sources. And of course, I've got other sources on the inside in some of these places where I can validate that those are true. That's the reason I bring you some of these things, is because I have other sources that confirm these things are true. That's how serious this is, folks. And that is why I don't care how much face we have to lose, how embarrassing it has to be. And I don't care if Trump puts whatever face he wants on some of these things. He needs to get that done for our national and economic security. We are in a perilous situation no matter what you hear from these folks. Thank you very much, folks. I appreciate that today. We'll be back, like I said, at 2:30 p.m. We're going to look at President Trump's comments specifically and what his objective is and just how convoluted all of this is at the presidential level. We'll take a look at that. And then at 3:30, we're going to be back with Jennifer.
They're going there to get a message. The Pakistanis are still playing an intermediary, and remember, it's not Iran that's pleading for negotiations. It's the Trump and those around him. Despite all the bravado that Trump exudes in front of the camera about, we're kicking ass, taking names. We got the Iranians on the run. We've destroyed their air force, their navy, their air defense. We've destroyed everything. We've won, actually. Despite all that bold talk, the reality remains is the United States constantly go and say, please get the Iranians to the table. Please have them come talk. So Arachi, the Iranian foreign minister, he is probably in Islamabad now. He's consulting with the Pakistanis about what Iran's position is. He's reaffirming to them that we haven't changed. You've got our 10 points. We've not softened on those at all. Make sure that the Americans understand that. And then, he's heading off. The foreign ministry has announced that they are not going to talk to Kushner and Witkoff, that's not on the table. So this is, I think, just a matter of Kushner and Witkoff getting a face-to-face meeting with the Pakistanis. And Pakistanis going to say, hey, the Iranians are serious about this.
Wow. So, Ray, why would the Iranians want to communicate with Netanyahu's puppets? I can't imagine they'd want to do it, whether Vance is with them or not.
No, you're right, Judge. And it's high time the Iranians made clear that they're not going to fool around with two openly declared Zionists. I'm remembering before one set of talks with Kushner and Witkoff. Actually, they stopped to get instructions from Netanyahu on their way to wherever it was, Geneva or Islamabad. I mean, they stopped there ostentatiously to talk to Netanyahu. There are many other signs of this. Actually, didn't Netanyahu this week say, look, no, not he, but some high official, we're waiting for permission from the United States to proceed either in Lebanon or wherever.
Yes.
That was Katz,
yes,
the defense minister.
Larry's 100% correct. The defense minister, Israel Katz, who sounds as extreme as Ben Gvir and Smotrich.
Yeah, so it's very clear. If Americans could only know this, it's being suppressed, tamped down in the mainstream press. But, I've said before, it's the old campaign slogan, it's the economy, stupid. Well, it's not only the economy, it's Israel, stupid. And never has it been clearer. And Joe Kent's interview with you, Judge, that was perfect. That was just you asked the right questions. He gave the correct, the accurate answers. And who knows better than a person at his level how this all goes down? And he says it's Israel, stupid.
Yes. Before we get to Kent, Chris has the clip of Israel Katz saying what Larry just said. He said, Chris.
Israel is prepared for the renewal of war against Iran. The IDF is ready both defensively and offensively, and the targets have been marked. They are waiting for a green light from the United States first and foremost in order to complete the elimination of the Khamenei dynasty, the initiator of the annihilation plan against Israel, and the successors of the Iranian terror regime's leadership. In addition, the goal is to return Iran to the age of darkness and stone by blowing up the main energy and electricity facilities and crushing the national economic infrastructure. The terror regime in Iran specializes mainly in the internal suppression of the population through the Revolutionary Guards and the Basij, as well as in energy blackmail by threatening to inflame global oil prices. It is down for the count. Its leaders are hiding in tunnels and are struggling to communicate and make decisions. Its skies are wide open, and all its national infrastructure and strategic facilities are exposed to attacks. Yet it declares that it is winning, because just like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, it does not care about the heavy price paid by the population. The main thing is personal survival, which is not guaranteed either. When the attack resumes this time, it will be different and deadly and will deliver devastating blows to the most sensitive places. This will be in addition to the massive blows that the Iranian terror regime has already suffered so far, which will shake and collapse its very foundations.
Larry, this guy is as detached from reality as Trump is.
Yeah. Well, in fact, he's part of the reason that Trump is saying some of the incredibly stupid stuff he's saying. Apart from Trump's obvious mental issues and the clear signs of early dementia or frontal lobe dementia. Nonetheless, when Trump came out and claimed that the Iranian leadership was divided and they don't know who's in charge, that's an Israeli lie. That came straight from Israel. I guarantee it. It was provided as liaison intelligence. So the CIA is passing it on as according to reliable intelligence from a liaison service. This is what the state of the state is. And when, in fact, it's just the opposite, that the Ayatollah Khamenei, he was a member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps when he was 17 and 18. He fought against Iraq. The same for the head, Khalifa, is that his name? The head of the legislature. And he's been seen as the sort of the lead negotiator with the United States. He too fought with the IRGC. He too fought against the Iraq War. And then you've got the current head of the IRGC. These three guys are all about the same age. They're cohorts. And you know from guys that have fought in the same war, and in particular they fought together, that creates enormous bonds that last a lifetime, sometimes closer than family. So this lie that Israel is pushing, that, the Iranians don't mean what they say because they're divided. Absolutely not. There's not a shred of evidence to support that. And yet Donald Trump is being told that, and Donald Trump believes that. So this is a case where it's not just Donald Trump confabulating something. He's actually repeating what he's being told.
Ray, are the Israelis as ignorant of Iranian culture and Persian history as the Americans are?
No, the Israelis know which end is up. The thing that troubles me most is they look at this as an existential situation right now. Things are not going their way despite all their protestations to the contrary. I foresee there will be a false flag attack, perhaps on one of our carriers or one of the ships accompanying our carriers, blamed on Iran. We'll have to know whether the U.S. Navy will participate in a cover-up, because the U.S. Navy will know which direction this missile comes from. My prediction is it will come from Israel or one of Israel's places there. And, this will put Trump in the position of saying, oh my God, I believe the Israelis, all Americans should believe the Israelis. Now we've got to obliterate them really, and now we've got to use even more serious weapons. And those serious weapons that haven't been used yet, of course, are nuclear weapons. I don't think Trump will use them first, but I do not rule out Netanyahu using them first if false flag doesn't achieve the required or the intended consequences.
Larry, what is the status in the Strait of Hormuz as we speak, to the best of your understanding?
The Iranians have it shut down. They dramatically increased the mining last week, and despite Trump's claims that there are U.S. minesweepers in their clearing, that's not true. That's a lie. That's false. The U.S. so-called blockade is hundreds of miles away from the Strait of Hormuz, and despite the claims by Hegseth and Kane that we've got it locked down. They don't. Independent sources confirmed, like yesterday, day before yesterday, 34 different Iranian ships came out and got past the blockade. So roughly, the United States, it doesn't have enough ships out there to actually run an effective blockade with the distance that needs to be covered. So basically, they can probably stop about 10% of what's going out. And, at this point, with the ceasefire in place, Iran's showing no sign of attacking right now. Yeah, they're gonna retaliate eventually for that, but it also creates some additional issues for the U.S. Navy. Again, they're understaffed, undermanned, undershipped, and so when they start detaining these ships, somebody's got to watch them. So then all of a sudden you have to start peeling off assets. So it's just a foolish policy on the part of the United States, counterproductive.
The Washington Post reported this week that Pentagon briefers told the Gang of Eight, that's the secret Congress within a Congress, that it will take 6 months to clear the mines. Does that number make sense to you, Larry? Because we're gonna play Hegseth, who's furious that this came out.
Yeah. This and as Ray knows, when you start getting these kinds of leaks, you always get leaks when there's disagreement between what the intelligence is saying and within the policy community. And so this is one way that, at least on this issue, the intelligence community is fighting back.
Ray, is there adversity between the CIA and the Pentagon at a time like this?
Yes, it has to be. Now,
you both said yes at the same time.
Yeah.
If you eliminate John Ratcliffe, who we know is just as Zionist as Witkoff and Kushner, if you eliminate him, you've got people in the CIA who really know what's going on, can't be fooled by all this stuff. Now, you have the New York Times telling exactly how this went down when the president let Mossad do the briefing, okay?
Right.
And they also, oh, isn't that great? And then the next day they told the New York Times, oh, well, it's not so great. So that's the kind of sycophancy that is attending Trump. And, in a tangible way, it makes me wonder, oh, gee, why did Secretary of the Navy Phelan decide to quit? Right? It's a hard time to leave me, Phelan, for God's sake, in the middle of a war. Well, it's because Trump wants to either use U.S. Navy in a way that they are sure to be defeated, and Phelan didn't want any part of that. That much is very clear to me without any inside information.
Here's Hegseth angry about the leak and suggesting the people that publish leaks are not patriotic. Chris?
There was a report, I believe, with the Washington Post that the Pentagon had briefed Congress that it could take up to 6 months to fully sweep the Strait of Hormuz for mines.
We would not speculate on a timeline. I saw that report. It was based on, again, another leak from a closed-door session, which was supposed to be classified. And allegedly, that was something that was said about we feel confident in our ability in the correct period of time to clear any mines that we identify. And would encourage other countries to be a part of such an effort as well. But we're tracking that very closely. Mr. Chairman, do you want to add anything to that?
No, sir. I think you covered it.
You don't need superpowers to keep your family safe from scams. All you need is malware.
How do the mines work? Are these must be more sophisticated than World War II mines? When you go over them, they explode.
Yeah. I don't think there's just one category of mine, but I know that there's proximity. Yeah, again, this is beyond my expertise, but I know there's both proximity mines, but there's some that can also they can be operated remotely. The point is that this destroyed Iranian Navy that doesn't exist last week, before Trump made the claim that minesweepers are out there sweeping mines, the Iranians were out sowing mines in great quantities. Normally, they'd put them out. They would mark them, so they would remember where we put one. They're not doing that, man. They're dumping them. So the the Navy that doesn't exist was out there dumping mines throughout the main lines that used to be used by tankers. So now they're required to go close through lanes that Iran strictly controls.
Ray, Joe Kent, and you alluded to this earlier, and I thought he was absolutely terrific, intellectually honest, and personally courageous. Said flat out that most American officials and private recognize that this is Israel's war. He also said flat out that most American officials recognize that the Israelis always oversell their case and always inflate their own importance. Does any of this surprise you?
It doesn't, and it explains why Trump has narrowed his circle of advisors to include only those who tell him what he wants to hear or tell him what parallels what the Israelis are telling him. So someone has to sort of wake Trump up and say, look, you've been taken to the cleaners. If that's not clear to you now, it'll be clear to you next week. Okay, you got to wise up and you got to make a deal because the world is suffering and the gasoline prices will go sky high, even worse than they are. He doesn't seem to be able to understand this just yet, but I'm hoping within the next couple of weeks, rather than give Israel the green light that Katz talked about, they'll give them the red light and say, look, this is over. You want to be obliterated, Israel? We're getting out of there, and we can make a deal where you don't get obliterated with the Iranians. Oh, if you don't agree, if you insist on a green light, we're out of there. And, you know, the Iranians do have the capability of destroying you, Israel proper.
Well, Larry, your report on Judging Freedom about the president's wish to understand more about the use of the nuclear codes, of course, as you know, had an international reach.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, you and I became Lego characters. Now, before this thing that we're about to play, I didn't know what the hell Lego was. I thought it was something that kids build with, but it is.
Yeah,
it is. It's also a big deal now. Chris?
Breaking news coming live from Washington, D.C. A story that the headlines barely let you see. Sit down, pay attention. Let me break it all down. Something went down this weekend in that big White House in town. We're not here to judge. We're just reporting what was said by a former CIA analyst. So listen to what he spread. Because when nuclear codes and generals make the news, everybody needs to know. Everybody's got to choose. Trump panics, generals hide the code. Somewhere in the situation room, tension overflows. Hear the panic in the White House is giving them the upper hand. Here, back and forth, the statements went one day peace, next day war. Nobody quite knew what the policy was anymore. And the report came out of London from the Mirror's page. The general told the president to step back from the stage. Now we cannot verify it, it's one analyst claim, but given all the context, nothing's quite the same. Panics, generals hide the code. Somewhere in the situation room, tension overflows. Reports say your general stood up and said, no way. And the whole world stopped and wondered what was going on that day. Trump panics, generals hide the code. Somewhere in the situation room, tension overflows. Reports say your general stood up and said,
Welcome to 2026.
Oh man! Well,
there you go, guys.
You know, one of the consequences of that is we got Trump yesterday to admit that no, we're not going to use nukes, never will.
Yes, that is
fact,
a consequence.
In fact, I was talking with Ed DeMarsh of Trends Journal, works with Gerald Celente. They called the White House to see if they would confirm this, and they said this is the first time they've ever really the White House would come back and say no, that's wrong. In the past, the White House would just ignore them. So obviously the story had an effect, but beyond, you know, I was reporting on what someone that I trust told me.
Right.
But then Robert Barnes, subsequently, he got additional confirmation from other sources. Right. Now, I think what really happened there was because General Kane is not, he's not in the chain of command for authorizing the use of a nuclear weapon. He's there to advise the president. But Trump was musing about using a nuke. Could they consider that? And Kane came back and said, no, you don't use that. So because Kane doesn't control the nuclear codes either. The chain of command on that, it goes President, Secretary of Defense, and then Stratcom. And but Kane was very direct that no, that shouldn't even be on the table. And the good news is Trump said it in public yesterday. Now, whether he'll remember today what he said yesterday, that's a whole nother matter.
Wow. Ray, should an American president ever contemplate using nuclear weapons in an environment like this against a country that has no present apparent ability to harm the U.S.?
Absolutely not. And, you know, if you look back to the very end of the Biden administration, General Milley, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time, was so concerned of what might happen. You recall the nuclear warning was way sky high at the time as to what Biden might do. He called the Chinese. He called this Chinese opposite number. It's in Bob Woodward's book, and Milley has pretty much confirmed it. He said, look, we're not going to use nukes if I'm around. We're not going to just realize everything's cool. That was right after the election, and then right after the inauguration of Biden. So it has a precedent here. It's a lousy precedent. I mean, you don't want to have that kind of thing, but there it is. That's how concerned Milley was. Now, if Raisin Kane is so concerned, I just don't think that he has shown that he has the backbone to go public or to even call anybody to say, oh, well, the president's going to do this, and I'm not quitting because I serve the president. He doesn't serve the president. He serves the Constitution, for God's sake. And if this is the time that he needs to speak out, it's now.
Larry, did your sources corroborate the report that Susie Wiles manipulated the president out of the Situation Room because he kept losing his temper inside, and they were fearful he would issue some order in a fit of anger?
Yeah. This was back when they were trying to conduct the rescue, a mission on that the backseater. We really still haven't gotten the straight story on that. And there appears that there were some other, let's call them special operations assets employed at the time. And this may have just been a bad coincidence where this plane came down in an area where perhaps the special operations forces were in the process of establishing what's called a FARP, forward area resupply position, so that they could fly in, stage, and then fly from that point to Isfahan or Natanz. So this is the war. Is the war at that point was not going as what the United States had anticipated, and we lost almost $500 million worth of aircraft just that one day alone.
Wow.
And that's the growing concern that Iran has significantly upgraded its air defense in the last 2.5 weeks, thanks to China. And I know the guys that are doing the planning with respect to trying to suppress enemy air defense, they're quite nervous.
Our friend Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski has speculated about whether these rescues were real, whether they ever took place, or whether they were just a fig leaf to cover for the failed mission to extract enriched uranium. Usually when somebody's rescued like that, they tell you who it is. You see them on television. You see them better. The president visits them in a hospital. You get them out of the zone. Nothing.
It took the words right out of my mouth, Judge. Who are these people? I mean, what are their names? Where are they? I mean, usually you find out these kinds of things not weeks later, but when they're happening. There's another reason that Trump is unwell, to put it mildly, and that appeared in Truth Social. He released a video showing his case about Russiagate. Now, for good or evil, his case is watertight. It's true. The Democrats ruined his first presidency, and he really has a big grudge against that. Okay. The interesting thing is, it's been suppressed from everything, from mainstream media and from the alternative media. So nobody knows chapter and verse as to how this 12-minute video lays out what happened. The only thing that's mentioned now is that Politico has watched this thing and put out a thing today saying, "Oh, Trump is going to resurrect Russiagate." This is what really, I think, affects his mind as much as anything else. He never had appropriate acknowledgement of what they did to him. And now he's trying his best to do that, but it's going flat because the media won't even replay a Truth Social.
Larry, was that Lego piece too much for you to watch?
Hey, listen, my camera has just disappeared. I don't know if we've been hacked or what. I can't even get it back on. So I'll be the voice. I'll sound like God.
All right,
this is God talking.
I'll give you the last. I'll give you the last word, Your Holiness.
Yeah. No, we'll find out Sunday night whether we have tacos on Sunday night, whether Trump again chickens out. I hope he does, because the Israelis were reporting that basically they get the green light on Sunday. The war will kick back on, and the Iranians are prepared to go to fight. They're not afraid of that. So we're not out of the woods yet.
Well, before we go, if Trump doesn't start another assault, and the Israelis do, wouldn't that be suicidal for them? Larry? How he's going?
Let me answer that.
Please, Ray.
Well, we know what happened last time. The Israelis went first. Secretary Rubio advertised the fact that the Israelis told us they're going to attack. And of course, we had an attack too, or preempt damage that it would have been even worse because of its Iranian retaliation on us. And so in other words, precedent would hold that whatever the Israelis do, Trump feels necessary to do likewise. So green light or not, orange light, he'll be in there, in my view, full force. And the reality is he doesn't have much more to offer other than nuclear weapons. He's not going to do that. My concern, again, is that Netanyahu may.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Larry, if you're still listening.
Yeah, I am. I'm here.
All right. Chris has posted a great photo of you.
And our dear friend, our brother, Professor Marandi, is here with us. Welcome back, Professor.
Thank you, Nima. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a great pleasure.
Let me start with yesterday, what has happened yesterday. We learned from the Iranian Foreign Ministry that he's going on a tour to Islamabad, then to Muscat, and later on to Moscow. And then something came out in the mainstream media. Basically, the Caroline Leavitt, the secretary of, the Speaker of White House, she said that they're going to send Steve Witkoff together with Jared Kushner to talk with Iranians in Islamabad. What was that? Was there any sort of communications between Iranians and Americans, and what is happening in Islamabad?
No, there are no direct communications. There are no direct negotiations. There are no indirect negotiations. Sorry, my cough won't go away. It's been with me for months now, but or at least for many weeks. Why they're doing this? It's difficult to say. You know how the Trump works and his White House works. They have. It's impossible to decipher what this is all about. But it could be that they're trying to, they're definitely trying to tell the American people that the Iranians are weak and the Iranians want to speak with us and they want to capitulate. for either one of two reasons. One, to buy time, but also to perhaps prepare the grounds for an assault. Because if when he says the Iranians want to talk, the Iranians want to meet us, the Iranians want to give up all these different things, and then when it doesn't happen, he can come out and say, which he has done already once, before. He can say they promised this, but they didn't do it, so we have to, we have to attack them. We have to do it by force. So the dishonesty of the Trump White House, I think, is clear for everyone. But the Iranian delegation is going to Pakistan. This is a response to the Pakistani delegation to Iran for mediation efforts. And Dr. Ghalibaf is sending, from my understanding, has sent a written message to the Pakistanis, which probably I'm sure the Pakistanis will hand over to the Americans, and that's how it's always worked. As I think, as has been made clear, except for the day when we were in Islamabad, and Dr. Ghalibaf, along with Dr. Bagheri and Dr. Araqchi, negotiated with Vance, Witkoff, and Kushner. Besides that day, we have not had direct or indirect negotiations. We've had messages go back and forth, which has been going on for many years. This is nothing new. So Dr. Ghalibaf his written message, I'm sure, will have a lot to do with the current situation between Iran and the United States. Of course, the Iranians are preparing for war. It could happen at any time. Some believe it is imminent. Some not so much. They don't believe that that's the case. In any case, the United States has brought in a lot of assets to the region, but the Iranians have also been preparing themselves during the last few weeks. And every day that goes by, the global economic crisis becomes more explosive because the Strait of Hormuz is closed, thanks to Trump's policy, thanks to the war, thanks to Netanyahu. Because as we all remember, before the war, the Strait of Hormuz was open for everyone. And when the war started, of course, Iran did not allow ships linked to the 5 countries that were helping the Americans wage war against Iran, helping the Americans and the Israelis. But other ships like Iranian ships, Iraqi ships, Russian ships, Chinese ships would go through. And then after the ceasefire, one of the, sorry I'm repeating this and you know this, and I'm sure most of your audience does too, but just a reminder, it's useful for people to remember why we are here. So according to the ceasefire, the Israeli regime was supposed to abide by a ceasefire. And by the way, today they killed at least 4 people so far today in Lebanon. They're killing Palestinians at large, in large numbers, slaughtering kids as well. But in any case, they were supposed to abide by the ceasefire, and they didn't. And Netanyahu began carpet bombing. So Iran said, we're not going to allow those extra ships to go through. The extra ships mean the ships that are linked to hostile countries, like the Emirates, like Kuwait, like Qatar, like Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, who were involved in the war against us. So Iran refrained from allowing ships to go through. Then finally, after 10 days or so, Netanyahu was forced to accept the ceasefire. Iran agreed to let those extra ships go through, as we saw in Dr. Araqchi's tweet. But then Trump said that he's going to continue to enforce an embargo on Iranian ports, which he had done a few days earlier. In other words, after the Israeli regime violated the ceasefire and Iran said, we're not going to send the ships, we're not going to allow the ships to go through, then the Americans imposed an embargo. And since the Americans said we're going to keep that embargo, the Iranians said, or that siege, the Iranians said, okay, then we're not going to allow these ships to leave. So during the last 16, 17 days, we could have had a lot of ships leaving the Strait of Hormuz. to ease the global economic crisis. But what Netanyahu and Trump did through their violations was to increase the global economic crisis. So we are, each day that goes by, the situation for the entire world gets worse. And so while there's no fighting on the ground, there are no explosions and no airstrikes and no missile strikes, but this crisis is going to eat away at the global economy.
We've learned yesterday that Iranian, the IRGC vessels escorted one of the tankers from the Gulf of Oman, from the Sea of Oman to the Persian Gulf, avoiding the U.S. Navy operation, because they wanted to seize this tanker, but they couldn't do it because of IRGC going there and escorting. Are we going to see more of this sort of operations on the part of IRGC and some sort of confrontation? It's not a war, but it's confrontation between IRGC and U.S. Navy.
I assume so. I mean, I can't say as a as an official to respond. I don't know the details. Continue to protect or these ships, and so the chances for some sort of confrontation increase as a result. But in any case, if the United States launches another wave of aggression against Iran, then I think that probably we're going to see a lot of missiles and drones and airstrikes being carried out. So for the time being, as long as there's a ceasefire, I think that the Iranians are going to continue trying to protect their ships, and that could lead to some sort of military standoff or some sort of clash, which could then expand into something much bigger. It's a very tense situation right now.
Is the leadership in Iran fractured, as Donald Trump trying to picture in the West, that the leadership is fractured, somehow pointing out or sharing, an article that mentions, let's go after those people who are not willing to deal with us and keep those people who are agreeing to deal with us. What is that?
Well, this is the language of the 19th, 18th century, early 20th century empire and imperialism and colonialism. The politically correct language and the language of international law, that has all been thrown into the bin. And so now the Americans are just behaving like thugs. They behave like thugs, they talk like thugs. It's like the mafia. Trump is a mafia boss, and these are his lieutenants in the media. I mean, when we were in Islamabad, the Washington Post called for the assassination of the Iranian negotiators. And when we were coming back, we were waiting for a missile to strike the plane. And so these are the media, these think tankers, these politicians. They're all like sort of lieutenants of the mafia don. But no, there's no fracture in Iran. I think by now everyone recognizes how Western media works. Even media that's opposed to Trump, when it comes to Iran, when it comes to Hezbollah, when it comes to the Israeli regime, they are working. They will repeat the propaganda, and they will talk about divisions in Iran because they may hate each other, but they're on the same team when it comes to the empire, and of course, when it comes to the Islamic Republic of Iran and the axis of resistance. In Iran, it's clear. It's just like before the war. We have a leader. The Constitution is very clear about his role and status. He's a very well-known person to senior politicians. He was not a public figure for ordinary Iranians, but senior figures knew him for decades because he worked in Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei's office. Then we have the Supreme National Security Council. After the martyrdom of Dr. Larijani, we have a new chair. It functions as before. And Dr. Ghalibaf, he has a mandate on behalf of the Supreme National Security Council, which includes the heads of the three branches of power of government, the head of the president, who's the head of the council, the head of the judiciary, the head of Speaker of Parliament. You have military leaders, you have people from the cabinet, and two representatives from the leader. So the Supreme National Security Council designated, with the support of the leader, Dr. Ghalibaf to carry out negotiations with the United States. So it's clear who the decision maker is. It's Dr. Ghalibaf. And he is the one who negotiates, of course, within the framework that the council and the leader have designated for him. So there's no division, there's no factions. This is not like some fragmented country, broken country where there are different factions holding different territory or anything like that. It's a normal country, and if you go out on the streets, everything is normal. The police are there. The garbage is taken every night. It's just as it was before. So this sort of propaganda is basically to help strengthen a particular narrative, and that is that maybe for example, Trump wants to buy time. So he's saying, well, we have to wait and see what's happening in Iran for us to be able to make a decision. But also, or that could be in parallel with this, would be to justify an assault on Iran, saying they can't make a decision because they're fragmented, or someone is blocking. So someone is blocking a decision, and so we have to start killing people again in order to get the right people to be able to make the decision, and that sort of nonsense. But it basically would be a justification to buy time. It could be, and it could also be a justification ultimately to wage war against the country. But it has nothing to do with the reality in Iran. If in fact, if we were really to look at the facts on the ground and make such a comment, it would be easier to say that the United States is deeply divided. We see that senior military, high-ranking officials have been removed, the latest being the Secretary of the Navy. That there's talk of a sort of civil war brewing in the Pentagon. We see politicians increasingly saying that Trump is not fit for governance to be president. So if we look at the evidence on the ground and the news that comes out of the United States, the divisions are in Washington, not in Iran. There's no one has been removed from power. No one has been, no senior military officials have been moved. No political figures have been moved. Dr. Ghalibaf is in charge of the file. So that's just all nonsense.
Because there were other news as well that they said Dr. Ghalibaf was removed from his position as the main negotiator or as the head of delegation, Iranian delegation. I don't know where did that come from, but they were talking about this as well. And what are they trying to achieve by these sort of rhetorics, in your opinion? What is the main goal? Because we know that the Iranian system, they don't have first-hand information from Iran, and they're trying to make some for themselves, for the consumption in the West. Your understanding of that?
Well, I think part of it is also psychological warfare for inside Iran, an attempt to make people feel that the situation is not good. At the end, because ultimately, people here, a strong majority of people here believe Iran won the war. And a strong majority of Iranians believe that the government should not be very flexible at all at the negotiating table. So, and the Americans right now, they're trying to gain concessions at the negotiating table, which they were unable to do so on the battlefield. So one way to do this is to demoralize Iranians, to divide Iranians, to make them fearful of stability at home, I would assume. Now, it hasn't had that effect. I believe that Iranians see through all the propaganda. They live with Western propaganda day and night, every day, and it's been going on for decades. So I don't see it having an impact in Iran, but I do think that maybe Trump is speaking to his own base. He's trying to, because the war is unpopular. So on the one hand, he may be trying to buy time to say, well, they can't decide. So maybe he wants to get more assets in place in the region, or to see if he can find an off ramp. But also, if he is planning to attack, and that's quite possible, very possible, then he would want to be able to convince his base that I tried to have peace, but it was the other side that is unable to make any moves because they're hardliners and they're moderates and they're at war with each other and that sort of nonsense. So I think it has a lot to do with his own constituency in the United States, but also trying to have an impact maybe on the ground in Iran.
How about that 8 women that Donald Trump saved from execution?
They were all blonde, if you notice. They all had similar pictures, and yeah, it was all fake. But it says a lot about many people. For example, I don't know if you saw my debate with Piers Morgan 3-4 days ago, but he also tweeted this and said, "Oh, this is great news." But I'm sure he knows that this is fake. I'm sure he knew when he did that tweet, because he has producers and they do research and they give him it was obvious this was all fake. There was not a single woman who was about to be executed for, I don't know, armed rebellion or anything. It was all just nonsense. So that is also part of the psychological warfare. And it was used by Trump to both demonize Iran, but also he said, well, they decided not to execute them so that the Iranians gave me those concessions. He wants to strengthen his hand at home and say, look, my threats and my power and my position have forced the Iranians to give me concessions. It's what Trump does. It's the only thing he's good at, actually.
Actually, I'm not sure, Professor Mandy, if Piers Morgan knew about the reality, because the guy, he's so much into the rhetorics in the West, and he's one of the main.
Well, the reason why I say this is that he retweeted the tweet of Trump hours later, and I do know that he does respond to my own tweets, and I and others wrote that this is fake news. Maybe, I mean, it's not impossible, but nowadays it's not like a year before. Now people have woken up across the world, and so, for example, when people like myself and others in the past, when we would say something online, the likes and the retweets were much less than now. Now people everywhere are seeing through the propaganda. They see that Trump is just making stuff up. Before, I think if they put out this story of 8 women on the verge of execution or whatever, I think a lot more people would have believed it. And that's how it usually was. The anti-Iranian propaganda was much more effective in the past. But nowadays, people are seeing right through it, and people are more active in responding to it because they know what the objectives are. They know that these lies are to justify death and destruction and murder. Just like, Trump recently extended the ceasefire in Lebanon, right? But Israel is killing Lebanese citizens in large numbers. I mean, 4 people already just this morning. Or in Gaza, the slaughter in Gaza is really bad. I mean, the genocide is ongoing. But you don't, the only thing you hear in the Western media is a ceasefire, an extended ceasefire. And you would assume that in Gaza there's a ceasefire. So, but people see through this today. we're living in a very different environment. People have woken up to, I mean, every day that the Israeli regime carries out atrocities, it only strengthens the anti-Zionist movement. It only awakens people further because so many people are now involved and they're reacting negatively to what they do. So when Trump puts out this propaganda or repeats this propaganda about these 8 women, before it would have had, I think, a lot more public support because people were ignorant. Many more people were ignorant about what's really going on in the world. But today I feel that it doesn't have that sort of
My name is Whitney Allen. I'm a widow, and my husband Ryan died when he was 35 years old when my 2 sons were a newborn.
It doesn't, the United States doesn't have the ability to manipulate public opinion across the world as it did before. But maybe you're right. I mean, maybe Piers Morgan simply thought that way. But his producers do their research. They go out and seek. They check stuff and they know what I tweet. They know what others tweet. So when he tweets something like that, it's hard for me to imagine that he doesn't know. And if he didn't, he would probably soon afterwards be informed about it. But again, maybe you're right.
Professor Marandi, what's going on? I think it's much deeper than that. And you look at the way that the Israeli AI generated videos, they're trying to picture that Iranian women were somehow raped during the protests. Iranian kids were raped. And looking at the numbers that they're giving us, even the president of the United States talking about 45,000 people were killed. We had some sort of 80,000 people. So where did it come from? Looking at what has happened in Gaza, I think they're trying to diminish, somehow distract people from the reality in Gaza, from what has happened in Gaza. Because we had this case of rape in Israel, raping prison, the people who were captured, the Palestinians who were in prison in Israel, they were raping them on camera. We had that. They're trying to do everything. And there was a report on Al Jazeera talking about this. And how deep is that? Because it seems that they're using the Iranian case by that somehow they created the protests, the riots in Iran, and then made this propaganda behind it to distract people from the reality of what is happening in Gaza, in southern part of Lebanon.
Well, Nima, years ago, I wrote a number of articles actually about this type of narrative. There was a time when a lot of nonsense about Iran was being promoted. For example, that during the war between Iran and Saddam Hussein when he invaded, that, for example, they would send kids to the war fronts and they would, run over minefields to clear minefields, just fabricated nonsense. And they'd say that they'd give them keys to heaven. And I've never seen such a thing, and no one else that has seen such a thing in the Iranian war fronts. But then it plays on those Orientalist tropes. And I actually wrote an article about these because you see them in these memoirs written by these Iranians and some of these Iranians in the diaspora, but they're all propaganda and fake. And I actually wrote an academic article responding to this. And I had very difficulty publishing it because they say, well, prove that there are no keys to heaven. And I said, well, you can't prove a negative. But I was a combatant in that war. And I had many friends who were combatants in that war. And then I told in one case, I told the editor of a very, very important academic journal. I said, if I were to write an article to say that in Iraq, because it was back in the day when the United States was occupying Iraq, in Iraq, the American soldiers have keys to heaven. Would you accept my article? And she, in response, said, no. Why? Because that would be an outrageous claim. I said, well, how come when they make these outrageous claims about Iran, and I say that they're not true, you say that I have to prove it. So if that accusation is made about American soldiers, it's rejected out of hand. But if it's Iranian soldiers, it is believed until it's somehow disproven, and there's no way to disprove it. Because it's something like that is almost impossible to disprove. But in any case, or for example, another one of those fake accusations was that they would say, and this is, I think, even more significant. They would say that Iranian female prisoners who were like members of terrorist organizations, they would rape them and then execute them. And that's not even the worst part of it. The worst part of it is that they would say that they would rape them for religious reasons. That if a woman is like, she hasn't had a sexual relationship and she dies, she goes to heaven. So they rape her so that she won't go to heaven. And where does this nonsense come from? Like, what are your sources? Which religious textbooks say this? There are none. It's all fake. It's all a lie. But it's widespread. I mean, nowadays, I don't know, but in the 1990s and at the beginning of this century, like reading Lolita in Tehran by Azar Nafisi, and all these other memoirs, and including history books on our region, these sort of things, kids being sent on minefields, keys to heaven, raping women, prisoners before execution. All of this was very widespread stuff. So now, but the difference today is that they've been carrying out all these atrocities in front of the eyes of the world for 2.5 years. And the West has been trying to justify it or hide it or ignore it. And so people see through it. So now when they try, and they know that Iran is opposed to the genocide in Gaza and the genocidal attacks in Lebanon. So now people don't see the propaganda the way they did before, where many people were much more naive back then, and they would accept the nonsense that the Western media would put out, or Western textbooks, or Western publishers would put out, think tanks. Now they say, well, the Iranians are actually the only ones fighting against this genocide, alongside the Axis of Resistance. And so these people who are carrying out the genocide are accusing Iran of mass murder and rape and all that, but they're actually doing it themselves, using dogs. They're men. They don't go to jail. They're celebrated in Israel for raping people to death. And so people don't buy it anymore. They see the genocide, and then they see the fake numbers, and people do more research than before because a lot more people are active, as I was saying earlier. So when I put something out, in the past, I would get maybe 100 or 200 likes or a few retweets. Now it spreads, and not just me, so many other people. Now there's so many young people who are so good that I feel like I'm really not important. I don't play much of a role because there's so many good people out there doing really good things, not just Iranians, people from across the world. So people don't believe this propaganda. They recognize that, oh, you're accusing Iran about rape when you're the ones who are doing it, or you're allowing your allies to do it. You're accusing the Iranians of killing like 80,000 people or 40,000 people, like 48 hours, just people on the streets. But for 2.5 years, you've been leveling Gaza and Lebanon too. So people don't buy this nonsense anymore. And I think it's clear that they want to sort of, through these accusations against Iran and the resistance, they want to clean up the Zionist regime's image. But it's impossible. It will never happen. And I think people across the world today, the support for Iran is global, and the support for the axis of resistance is global, and the anger and hostility towards Zionism and ethno-supremacism is global too. And by the way, if you saw the interview with Piers Morgan, he refused to answer my question when I asked him, do you consider a regime that is based upon ethno-supremacism to be legitimate or not? He refused 3 times. Why? We know why. Because if he says that, he'll be in trouble. And, that's basically what we've all learned during the last 2.5 years. That when it comes to Israel and Zionism, that's a very clear red line.
Professor Marandi, what are the main obstacles when it comes to the negotiations with the United States right now? And how do you see the Iranian position considering the Strait of Hormuz and the Iranian nuclear program?
I don't know what will happen today. After all, the Iranian response is written, and I'm sure we'll also have a verbal, there will be discussions going on, a verbal aspect with the Iranians, and the Pakistanis will be talking to. But I think the main part is written, because Iran doesn't want anything to be misinterpreted or misunderstood. So we'll have to see. But the Iranians have always been willing to be flexible, to show goodwill, but not to give up their sovereignty. And I think that the war itself should have been evidence enough for the United States to show that Iran is not going to submit and to give up its sovereign rights. It's willing to be flexible, but it already was flexible, and that's what Trump, the JCPOA, which actually was not a very good deal for Iran, because the Americans were not abiding by it under Obama. It was flawed in the way in which it was designed, and the Iranians made mistakes in that deal. So, but in any case, Iran carried out, the Iranians signed on to the JCPOA back then because they were willing to be flexible. But even back then, no one was willing to sacrifice Iran's sovereignty. Today, after all, 2 wars in less than a year, and the failure of the Israeli regime and and the United States and the U.S. proxies in the region, there's no reason at all to believe that Iran is going to give up its sovereignty. So Iran, if the U.S. is really serious about concerns about Iran's nuclear program, that can be solved. We already had an agreement before, but it remains to be seen what the United States wants to do. I think, from what I'm hearing from others, that Trump wants an off-ramp, but the Israelis and the Zionist lobby in the United States won't let him have it. Let me give you an example of where he could have had his off-ramp. When Iran refused to allow those extra ships to go through the Strait of Hormuz because of Netanyahu's slaughter across Lebanon, after a few days, Trump imposed that blockade on Iranian ports. But Iran continued to refrain from allowing those ships to go until Netanyahu accepted the ceasefire, right? And then Iran said, okay, those extra ships, in accordance with our agreement with the Americans, our ceasefire agreement, they can go. But Trump, he could have had his off-ramp there. He could have said, okay, now that the Iranians are opening the Strait of Hormuz to these extra ships, I will lift the siege. That would have been an excellent, and Trump, he could have said this was a victory, and even though it would not have been a victory, but he would have framed it that. He could have framed it that way. He didn't do that. He escalated. He said, I'm going to keep the siege. And then the Iranians said, well, if that's the case, then we're not going to allow those ships to pass through. So people are saying he wants an off-ramp, but, and the ceasefire, this was an excellent opportunity, but he did not pursue it. So it's impossible for me to say what he wants to do and what he is going to be forced to do. Again, I constantly speak of Joe Kent, a Trump official installed by Trump, head of counterintelligence. He says that Iran was no threat. Iran was not pursuing a nuclear weapon, and this war is Israel's war. This is a Zionist war. So when he says that, then I don't think within 60 days the world has changed that much for it to be anything different now. Although I believe that what Iran is trying to do is that through economic pressure, it is trying to force the United States to prioritize its interests over Israeli regime interests. Now, whether it will succeed or not, time will tell. But what Iran wants to do is put so much pressure on the United States that at some point the Americans tell the Israelis, we just can't do this anymore. We have to think about our own economy. It's in bad trouble. Our own military has suffered as a result of this war, and so we have to prioritize our own interests over Israeli regime, the interests of the Israeli regime. This is what the Iranians are trying to push for. I don't think we're there, but I think that is the ultimate objective.
Yeah, just mentioning that Joe Kent was the head of counterterrorism, Professor Mahdi. And
counterterrorism. That's
yeah,
right.
And the case of Strait of Hormuz, Professor Mahdi, we've learned that the Iranian parliament is deciding about the future of the Strait of Hormuz, and Iran has already received some tolls from the strait. And how is that going? Is that happening as we talk?
Well, now the strait is closed, and thanks to Trump. And some Iranian ships are apparently getting through and leaving and coming in, but it's other than that, none. Other ships are not passing through, as far as I know. But until Trump's siege, yes, Iran was receiving money from ships that were passing through, and that money has gone to the government.
And I think the basics right now for the Iranian negotiators would be the Iranian nuclear program and how they can, because the case of the Strait of Hormuz is not negotiable. Is that the case?
It is non-negotiable, but I don't think that the Americans are going to let go that easily, because as far as I know, that was also a key issue for the Americans. On the one hand, they wanted to be a part they wanted to be a part of this mechanism of control, but then elsewhere, when Iran said no, then they said, well, no one should be allowed to have authority over the Strait of Hormuz. But the Iranians told the Americans, I mean, I'm using my own words, that this is not the Gulf of Mexico. This is the Persian Gulf. So you have no right to have control over the strait. But it is interesting. On the one hand, the Americans were saying, okay, well, let's be partners. And then, but elsewhere, when Iran said no, they said, well, no one should be able to control the strait. But the Iranians are not going to relinquish control of the strait. And it's not simply about money, Nima, as you know. A big part of it is security. The Iranians do not want to allow the Americans to rebuild their military bases in the Persian Gulf. And they don't want these Persian Gulf regimes to be a platform for further aggression against Iran. So a large part of this is about security, but a large part of this is also about reparations, because ultimately these countries in the Persian Gulf are answerable for the slaughter of these kids, for the slaughtering of families, for the destruction of so much infrastructure. True, the Americans and the Israeli regime fired the missiles, but if these governments did not give consent, the Americans could not have waged this war. And if without their consent, the Americans cannot wage war again. They cannot continue the war. Without Saudi air bases, without the airspace of these countries, without the financial support of these countries, without their bases, without being allowed to use civilian areas in the Persian Gulf region, a war cannot be carried out by the Americans. Whether it's a land assault or whether it's a strike deep inside Iran, like near Isfahan, where they tried to come in and remove, steal Iran's uranium, or whether it's missile and air and missile strikes. Without these countries, the Americans could not have waged this war. So they're complicit.
We had Zelensky going to Saudi Arabia. What is the Ukrainian government trying to do? And is that related to some sort of military cooperation? Because Zelensky is not in a good position right now, and we know what's going on in Ukraine. But what the desperation in these Arab GCC countries in the Persian Gulf is somehow unbelievable. What do they want from Zelensky?
I think Zelensky will provide you with extraordinary drone capabilities, but he's in enough trouble as it is, and he is desperate to use his capabilities to fight the Russian armed forces. But I'm sure that there will be some form of cooperation, but it's going to be too little and too late. Iran's drone capabilities are extraordinarily massive, and the targets in the Persian Gulf region are so many and so easy to strike that there isn't much that they can do to prevent Iran from retaliation. And have no doubt, if the Americans or the Israeli regime starts targeting Iranian critical infrastructure, Iran will hit Israeli critical infrastructure. The regime's critical infrastructure will be hit hard. But all these Arab family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf, their critical infrastructure will be destroyed too. And Iran is not going to hold back. It's not going to pull punches. And we're now at the end of April, and people can go and check the weather forecast. Within 3 weeks, if not less, the weather in the Persian Gulf is going to get much warmer and much more humid, and then it will go up. And for 5-6 months, it will be intolerable. American troops and others will have great difficulty in this region in the coming months. But also, if the electricity goes out in these countries, people will have to leave. The Emirates will be emptied. The whole regime will collapse. So the smart thing to do would be for these family dictatorships to tell the Americans, you're not allowed to use our territory. But they don't have that sort of agency.
Here is what the Pakistani sources are just moments ago put out, that prospects for the resumption of the second round of US-Iran talks are rapidly fading, as Tehran is still not ready to meet the US delegation. And Reuters reported that Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi presented a list of demands to Pakistani mediator. What are I think Iran is somehow is communicating that there has to be some sort of preconditions before the meeting happening. What are those preconditions? What are those basic or crucial points on the part of Iranians?
Well, the U.S. violation of the ceasefire. The United States has imposed a siege on Iranian ports. These are acts of war. So how the ceasefire was very clear, and the terms of the ceasefire were clear. And also, the United States has attacked Iranian ships. It has hijacked Iranian ships. These are all acts of war and violations. So I would imagine that Iran would demand an end to the siege and the return of all of the Iranian ships that have been hijacked, if not other things as well. But these, I would imagine, would be at the top of the list. Because remember, Nima, how can Iran negotiate with the United States when the United States is not abiding by its current commitments? What is there to talk about? If I sell you a car and you pay for the car, but I don't hand it over to you and I withhold the car, and then I come and say, I don't know, now I have a washing machine to sell to you. And you say, well, first of all, hand over the car. Why in the world would you why would you purchase something else from someone when he's withholding the goods that he had already sold to you? The Americans have an agreement with Iran. It's a ceasefire agreement. Iran has certain obligations, Americans have certain obligations. The Americans think that the Iranian side must carry out its obligations, but they don't have to. That's how they behave. That's what the empire is like. That's what this exceptionalism is all about. That was the problem with the JCPOA, because Obama had obligations and Iran had obligations. The Iranians made the mistake of carrying out their obligations, and Obama failed to do so in most cases. So the JCPOA was, for Iran, a failure. This time around, the Iranians are not going to negotiate that way. They're saying, okay, we will only agree when you carry out your obligations too. If you don't do them, if you don't carry them out, then we won't either. So when the Israeli regime said, we're not a part of the ceasefire, Iran said, you are. The Pakistani prime minister also acknowledged that. So we're not going to carry out our obligations either until you abide by your own obligations. When Trump later said, well, I'm preserving the siege, even though you're abiding by your commitments, then the Iranians said, no, that's a violation of the ceasefire, so we're not going to carry out our commitments. So my guess, and again, I'm not privy to any Iranian demands or what is in the letter that Dr. Ghalibaf gave to the Pakistani senior officials, but I would imagine that it would be that in order for us to move to a second phase of negotiations, first, what has already been agreed upon has to be implemented in full by both sides.
I think, Professor Marandi, many people believe that Iran is not going to abandon Lebanon. Lebanon is part of the deal. Lebanon will be and always is is among the basics for Iranian negotiators. And we know what is happening right now in Lebanon. They call it a ceasefire, which is not a ceasefire. It's somehow a ceasefire between Israeli government and Lebanese government, but they're attacking people in the southern part of Lebanon, and they're attacking, somehow demolishing, destroying everything in southern part of Lebanon. And Hezbollah is capable of, we've just lost Professor Marandi. He's going to be back in a minute. And I think what I'm trying to make here, what I'm trying to say here, that Lebanon is so much important for Iran right now. And Iran cannot leave Lebanon alone. Because if Iran doesn't support Lebanon, that doesn't make sense to the people, because the new polls in Iran are showing that the support to the acts of more than 80% of the people in the new polls show that they believe Iran should support the acts of resistance. Basically, they have to support Hezbollah in Lebanon. And this is the basic question right now. Where is Lebanon in these negotiations that are happening between Iran and the United States? And how Iran would defend Hezbollah? Because the only force right now, Professor Marandi is back. Professor, I was telling that the only reason that Israel is not occupying or destroying Lebanon the way that they did in Gaza and in the West Bank is because of Hezbollah. And where is Lebanon in these negotiations between Iran and the United States?
You should get life insurance because you never know. My dad has never been in better shape. Lost weight, exercising every day, and he had a stroke and passed away.
Well, this connection is not very good. So I hope I won't be disconnected. The Lebanese government is conspiring with the Israeli regime and Trump against the people of the South. And they're traitors to their own country. There's, this day when Iran and the United States came into an agreement over the ceasefire, the prime minister and the president, they tried to wreck that agreement and say, we're going to pursue a ceasefire through a different route, which was ridiculous because that it was already agreed upon. And they would have had a ceasefire without paying any political price. but the Israeli regime carried out major attacks and then invaded the south and now occupy parts of the south because of what they did. So what they did is treacherous, treason in any way you look at it. They were trying to conspire with Netanyahu against their own people. But the Iranians are not going to relinquish Lebanon at all. Let me put it this way. Iran will treat Lebanon as it treats its nuclear program. It will treat Lebanon as it deals with its own borders. It will not allow Lebanon to be sacrificed, no matter how long this takes, no matter what the cost. I mean, let me give you an example. Why did Trump put in a siege on Iranian ports? Because Iran would not allow the ships to go through until the ceasefire in Lebanon was implemented. So it was because of Lebanon that Iran refused to allow those ships through. And it was because Iran did not allow those ships through that Trump imposed that siege. So Iran is more than willing to make sacrifices for its allies, and it will continue to do so. And Iran will not allow the south of Lebanon to remain occupied. This is a tough war. It is a difficult war, and there may be very dark days ahead. But Iran's determination is very clear.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Brandy, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
It's always a great pleasure being with you, Nima.
That was back then. Then fired more missiles. Okay? Then it seized some ships. So what did we exactly destroy? And this is exactly what the Trump administration, Trump himself, and Pete Hegseth have been saying. Oh, we destroyed Iran. They lied. And what I'm going to share with you is the proof straight from their own intelligence reports. So I'm going to be talking about the naval aspects of it. I'll share some clips with you, provide you my own analysis about this, and I will conclude with some short clips that I gathered from some media outlets here in my location and in some other locations in the Middle East. So make sure to stick with me till the end of this live stream. So the White House has said that the Iran military was completely annihilated, and at the same time, the U.S. intelligence disagreed with that assessment quietly. Even the intelligence community should have the gut enough to tell Trump to his face, stop lying, man. And it's the same with Pete Hegseth yesterday, standing at the podium and saying, or spewing lies, basically, which what it was. And that is exactly what Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, did yesterday, that stating that the U.S. embargo on Iran is expanding globally and that Iran still has the opportunity to reach a good deal with the United States. No. It's the other way around. Iran is not willing to, Iran is not going to cave in. And Iran is still standing. And this is where the lies of Pete Hegseth come in, especially when he add in when he added during the press conference that no ship is allowed to sail from the Strait of Hormuz to anywhere in the world without permission from the US Navy, end of quote, which was completely a lie, because Iran just allowed some ships across the Strait of Hormuz, and the deposit for the fees for the transit were deposited in the Iranian central bank, more than one ship. So what the reality, what Pete Hegseth is saying versus what the reality is are two different stories. And this is where the lies come to compound to the point that they lost track of what they've said before. Because when he's discussing, for example, the impact of the embargo, explaining that it has severely hampered Iran's commercial capabilities, and that the US Navy has so far turned back 34 ships from the Strait of Hormuz. That's what it's saying, which has nothing to do with the truth. Equally important, and if it is this case, then why would you fire the Secretary of Navy? If all this is going well, then why would you fire him? Yeah. And adding to this, Pete Hegseth and the President Donald Trump, when they argue about, specifically for the Secretary of Defense, when he asserted to the complete destruction of the Iranian Navy, because the Iranian Navy is at the bottom of the Gulf, in quote. What a bunch of nonsense. The Iranian Navy still stands, by the way. They are not at the bottom of the Gulf. And the US cannot get closer to the Strait of Hormuz. Why? Because you're looking at Iran's capabilities, which I will be discussing and sharing a clip with you about why Iran is preparing certain types of missiles as we speak. So when Pete Hegseth, Secretary of Defense, saying that any attempt by Iran to lay more mine will constitute a violation of the ceasefire. Well, hold on a second. It was you that had violated the ceasefire, meaning the US in this case. And it's all this bravado has nothing to do with the reality. What are we trying to intimidate Iran? It's not going to work. At the same time, if we are to put these statements under the lenses of reality, when, for example, Hicks is saying, oh, the blockade is going global, how real is this? And I'm here to refute this kind of statements because I listened to it yesterday. That's why I wanted to do this for you today before I leave this my location here to our next destination. So this is a part that has some might say, well, it has some meaningful substance to it or behind it. Yeah, it might be. No one sails from the Strait of Hormuz to anywhere in the world without the permission of the United States Navy, end quote. But at the same time, it doesn't make any sense because some ships have crossed the Strait of Hormuz once they paid the fees for crossing to Iran, not to the US. Equally important, there are real limits. Literally, there are real limits. Of course, now we are talking about another aircraft carrier, the US, that is on its way to join so-called the blockade. No, because we saw this before in the Red Sea, and we saw what the outcome of when the USS Eisenhower had to leave, claiming that it has to be fixed or whatever some issue was with it. Has nothing to do with that. So that leads us to address the real limits. US officials saying the blockade has turned back 34 ships. But here is the hard truth. The ship tracking data showed, and I have the link for it, I'm going to share it with you because it was from here, from Europe, shows that Iran has still been able to move its own sanctioned oil cargoes. And Iran is using armed, small, fast boats to lay mines. That means what? Who is in charge? It's not the US, as Trump will have you believe, especially for my American viewers. Americans needs to wake up.
If you got hit, even if you were not driving, you need to try this.
Because if you were in a car accident,
and this is again, those fast boats, lay in mind. And as a matter of fact, I read yesterday a report that suggests, again, suggesting that it will take up to 6 months to clear the mines. 6 months. So let me share the link with you for this particular news. I'll put it in the chat box and you can read it later on should you decide to do so. Now, and with this, I'm going to play a clip to highlight to you that the bravado about we destroyed Iran's launching pads, we destroyed Iran military and so forth. And yet, Iran's missiles are returning to service far faster than you can even believe, even faster than before. And I'm going to share a clip with you to see it with your own eyes. And I'll play the, I'm sorry, I'll do the translation for you because it's very, very short. So let me, not this one. Here we go. And I do give credit, this one, to Step News Agency. That's their clip here. So what I'm going to do is, it's very short. It's just to show you what is going on and what the U.S. is really lying. Donald Trump and on is lying. Here is what it says. Iran's hell is back. Missiles and drones are being re-equipped, and Iranian leaders are threatening America and Israel aimed at the ongoing truce. While some expect Tehran to prepare for surrender, which is a sort of wishful thinking anyway, it appears they are using the lull to prepare for renewed war. The Iranian news site Noor news agency quoted Majid Musavi, commander of the aerospace force of the Islamic of the IRGC, as saying that Iran is modernizing and re-equipping its missiles and drone launch platform at a faster pace than before the war. Although the veracity of Musavi's statements is uncertain, if accurate, it represents the blow to Washington, which set the objectives of the war as eliminating Iran's missile capabilities. However, according to Musavi's statements, this objective has not been achieved. Has Iran emerged stronger than before, or are these merely pronouncements for domestic consumption? And I sort of, so far, what I have seen, based again, what I shared with you for the last week or two, as far as the updates of what's going on, Iran will not have any reason to just bluff. Why will they do that? And this is exactly what Iran is doing. So I just want to share that clip with you for you to see, because it was the same argument I made yesterday about the missile Qa'im 100. We all know what it means now. And there is a conversation inside Washington about, okay, what's next? It's because once Iran finalized the stage for this to become an ICBM, it's over for the US. And we don't have anything that can counter the ICBM, the hypersonic. And this is where you start to think in terms when the Donald Trump and his Secretary of Defense, which in another word, it's just another pathetic servant anyway. Nobody has the gut to tell Trump to his face. Who the heck you think he is? You know, it's kind of, to me, that's what leadership is all about. You have to stand for what's right. You can't just bow to pressure just because he's the boss. Well, he's the boss, so what? You give him the proper respect, but that's about it. But the sadly enough is that most of the serving in cabinets are compromising their own principles. And this is exactly why I don't believe Iran is bluffing. because many were thinking about the idea of the Qa'im 100 was nothing but a bluff, and it turns out not to be the case. The same argument I will make about, no, we destroyed Iran, we destroyed Navy, whatever. They're lying, because Iran is still standing and Iran is still firing missiles. That's what it means. So when Donald Trump comes and say, oh, the good deal window, whatever, it's nonsense. Why? Because there are more questions than there are answers. And when the more Donald Trump says that, the more it strains his credibility, which he doesn't have any. You and I know, because the reality as of now is that the talks, the negotiations are essentially stalled. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you, actually, as a matter of fact, I can show you the image right now. Do you know who's in Moscow right now? Is Iran's foreign minister, Sayyid Abbas Araqchi, is right there in Moscow. Araqchi yazur, that's what it says in Arabic. Araqchi yazuru Russia fi lahdat tas'id hasima. Araqchi is visiting Russia in a critical moment. After that, he's going to go to the region near Pakistan. Makes you just wonder. And this is why Tehran has refused to participate now in the second round of in-person talks in Islamabad unless the naval blockade is lifted first. They put in conditions. The very blockade Hexat is touting as expanding. And that's, to me, the way I look at it. If these negotiations to ever take a step forward, that's a fundamental sort of preconditions the US has not met, and Iran is demanding. And that in itself, from part of the US, is sending contradictory signals, especially the US, because the US flip-flops. You can't trust the US administration or government for that matter. Trump simultaneously claimed, and I put this in quotes because I had to keep it, the concept of a deal is done, end of quote. That's what Trump is saying. While at the same time threatening to bomb Iran's power plants and bridges if a deal isn't signed. That's some sort of an unusual combination of confidence and coercion. Doesn't make sense. Who wants to negotiate under this kind of conditions? Even the ceasefire itself is disputed. Iran's military claimed that the US seizure of a cargo in the Gulf of Amman violated the ceasefire and constituted maritime piracy, and rightly so. Why will US seize the cargo ship? And at the same time, Iran is not backing down. Iran says he will retaliate. And to make matter worse, especially in my location here in Europe, is that most of the Europeans' conversation is that the so-called allies are not on board on this. The French president, Emmanuel Macron, said yesterday, the US could not complain about a lack of ally support in an operation they choose to undertake alone. He is spot on. Hexat himself, this guy here, which I never believed he was qualified, he was never qualified for the position. Hexat himself acknowledged that the US is not counting on Europe, which is a remarkable admission given Europe's dependence on Hormuz. That's what I'm saying. Europeans now, and again, I talk to people here, Europeans are now really caught between a rock and a hard place because they wanted to have the Iranian oil, but also they're so scared and afraid of the US. Well, where do you stand? We saw what's happened in Germany. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to share a picture or clip with you later on about Helsinki. the prime minister of Helsinki. She's another clueless. So we'll get into that in a moment here. So the bottom line to all this so far here, this blockade expansion, yeah, it's there, but is it going global? No. Even though Pete Hexat has said, oh, we have the naval power to enforce it more globally. I don't think so. What do you think? China just going to be sitting watching? What do you think? Russia's just going to be sitting and watching? And as a matter of fact, Russia just did another test of a missile. Makes you just wonder the timing of all this. You remember last time I told you about North Korea embarking on some testing of missiles? Even Iran itself is embarking on some. Is something working or about to happen? Yeah. But at the same time, the claim of Donald Trump that, oh, a good deal opportunity remains open is deeply, what's the word I'm looking for? Paradoxically, you know, it's paradoxical. You can't believe, you can't trust what Donald Trump is saying. Yeah. U.S. doesn't know. We don't know. We don't know what we want. Yeah, we're pressuring, saying we will bomb you, and if you don't sign an agreement, it doesn't work that way. It just doesn't work that way. So what you have, basically, you have the gap between the administration's public claim, what Donald Trump and his subservient secretaries are saying, and you have, on the other hand, the intelligence community or the intelligence reality that has been glaring through this conflict. And you know what's the key to all those? Is that we can defeat Iran, okay? You will not be able to regime change because Iran government is still standing, and Iran's capability will not be diminished or destroyed. Simple as that. And as a matter of fact, Iran is prepared for the long haul. We're talking about 2 years. They can fight for 2 years. And this, what I need you to understand, that's why I wanted to do this for you, as far as the understanding, especially from the US, the pattern of overstated claim. Another word for lies. So the Trump administration has repeatedly declared, oh, near total destruction of Iranian capability, only for reality to contradict them shortly after. It's no different than what Pete Hicks said yesterday. What an idiot. So when Trump is saying whatever, no, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Because if I am to break it down just in 2 or 3 areas, for example, on missiles, if we are to talk about the Iranian missiles and capabilities, like I'm going to share just a few pictures to make a point here. The idea is the White House flatly declared, and it's on a record, and I have the link for it, that Iran's ballistic missile capacity is functionally destroyed. End quote. That's exactly what the statement's coming out of the White House, which is a lie. Yeah. They add in that, oh, Iran's Navy, it's combat ineffective. Once again, it's another lie. The complete total area dominance over Iran, meaning we control over Iran, it's another lie. And yet, on the very day, the same day after similar claims were issued, what happened? Qatar was targeted with missiles. And as a matter of fact, another missile from Iran landed in Abu Dhabi and killed an individual there. So what basically the intelligence we're saying, it's just the intelligence didn't come forward publicly to say, you know what, Donald Trump, stop, Mr. President, stop lying. Stop lying. Because here is what the assessments of the intelligence is saying. Roughly half of Iran missile launchers are still intact. And thousands of one-way attacks, drones remain in Iran's arsenal. And this is the recent US intelligence assessment. This is a US assessment, not a Mossad assessment or La DST French or MI6. No. This inside the US are saying this one. As a matter of fact, to my knowledge, but again, the name, I don't know the name because it's anonymous. You can't, sources from the IC will have to remain anonymous. One source, you know what I said? It said that for Iran, they are still poised to wreak havoc, absolute havoc through the entire region. By the region, it's because when you look at this map here, it will make more sense to you. Take a look. All US presence in those locations. This is why 2 days ago, it was a meeting in Cyprus by the EU, because part of that. But for Iran, it's all these locations are within reach. And again, that's what the intelligence assessment is saying. Even the head of the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, is Lieutenant General James Adams. I got a picture of him. Yeah, James Adams, right here. He's the head of the DIA. Okay, he is in a written statement, and that written statement is under oath. So, in a written statement, it said that Iran still has thousands of missiles and one-way attack of UAV, unmanned aerial vehicles, capable of targeting US and partner forces in the region. And if that's not enough, then I don't know what is. So why on earth the secretary is coming yesterday morning and lying about it? Why on earth Donald Trump is saying stuff that don't exist? And why on earth no one in the administration has the gut to come forward and say, Mr. President, this is not right? Of course, we have a sleepy American citizenry. People are clueless as to even what's going on. But you pay what you vote for. That's the point. That was on the missile side. On the Navy side, you have statements coming out of the White House. Oh, we completely destroyed Iran's Navy. Yet, the Joint Chiefs Chairman confirmed only half of the IRGC small attack boats have been sunk. Well, let that sink in when you consider what does Iran have regarding the speedboats. And as we see today, Iran is still actively using these boats to lay mines and, of course, challenge whatever ships come across the Strait of Hormuz. Then on the air defense, once again, the incompetent Secretary of Defense said, and I quote, Iran no longer has an air defense, end of quote. He also added, and I quote, we own their skies, end of quote. What I don't understand is how can people stand knowing that they are saying lies and go ahead with that? That's just what I don't understand. I don't get it. But beside all this, and here is what happened to Hicksett when he said the last one, about we own their skies, meaning Iran's skies. You know what happened after that? He was forced to concede shortly afterward. Why? Because the downing of the F-15. Of course, they're not going to address the attack on the F-35. That stays classified. Because why? It's because that's one of the top on the list of weapons we sell to countries, let alone the cost, astronomical. To my knowledge, the last country that just purchased some is, I think, Morocco, which doesn't make any sense to me from a cost perspective. They are astronomically costly to maintain, and the US controls those planes. But when the F-15 Eagle was shut down, Hicksett had to retract his statement. Because what he said turns out to be a lie. So, and this leads me to ask one key question, and that key question is why Iran has been able to absorb the strikes. It's a legitimate question to ask. And this, by the way, has nothing to do with luck. There is no such thing. It was a deliberate Iranian strategy. And this, you have to go back a few years ago. Pre-war planning. What did Iran do? To my knowledge, and again, I discussed some of the military aspects when I wrote my Iran book back then. I did mention, what if the eventuality of a conflict? Well, it turns out to be that was the case of what this pre-war planning meant for Iran military. Which means, in a simple language, what Iran was able to do is through this planning, to mitigate the impact of US-Israeli strikes on its weapons arsenal. And how that happened? It with this operational planning undertaken in an anticipation, because they expected this to happen, of the conflict, and what they did prove effective in preserving Iran's missiles and drones capabilities. That is the hard fact. And that's also the assessment or the conclusion the IC, the intelligence community here in the US, reached. Because why? Iran has developed extensive tunnel networks under mountains. We're talking about missile cities. I remember sharing a clip with you about this one, because those shelters or those tunnels are built into mountain terrains with some facility at a depth of 500 meters down, which makes it very, very difficult. So to understand all this reality is that this fit the recognizable template coming out of Washington, the lies, maximalist public claim of victory. Why? So we can serve the domestic political agenda or messaging. Because Donald Trump knows. The guy is, and I'm starting to wonder, and again, I have nothing against Mr. Trump. I don't care for Mr. Trump anyway. I didn't vote for him. I don't vote for American anymore, because you can't trust them anyway. What I was going to say is, the question I was going to ask is, and I'm starting to ask, is he, and please weigh into this question, your opinion matters to me, is he inherently a liar? And I'm starting to think, is this something wrong with his genes? And I don't know. You can live a life like that, man. You lie in right and left. And I'm like starting to wonder, is he inherently a liar? So just let me know in the chat box what you think about this one. So when he will go and claim this victory, yeah, of course, he wants to serve the domestic audience here. But at the same time, you have the follow-up from the IC, the intelligence community, leaking different assessments altogether. And what they are saying is that the reality of what Donald Trump is saying, the reality is completely the opposite and different. And so, like I said, the Hegseth is saying we stopped 34 ships. The tracking data for ships says otherwise. Because this independent, and those are not government associated, this independent tracking data from the armed conflict locations and event data showed Iranian strikes persist as of today. And as a matter of fact, what it shows is that Iran's strikes are some sort of persistent, okay, at a relatively steady and uninterrupted pace from the start of the war through to ceasefire. At least that's what it was. So when Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth now claims the blockade is ironclad and is a deal is within reach, oh man, there is reasonably a basis for skepticism here. Not because those things are impossible. That's not the case. It's because this incompetent administration has demonstrated a track record of lying, of letting political messages run well ahead of operational facts on the ground. That is where the issue is. And I'm kind of quite disturbed by this reality. I don't know. We need to take a step back and think. If the truth matters to you, hit like, subscribe, and tap that bell. No spin, no agenda, just the stories they don't want you to know. Don't watch from the sideline. Be part of the movement. Your support keeps the truth alive. Thank you. Indeed. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play some clips for you I have few, very short. Then I want to leave you with some key questions and conclude or summarize my conversation today. And I'm going to keep it brief because I have some other stuff I need to do because I will be leaving this location. So, all right, let's start with the first. And the first one, it's I'm just going to play it. There is nothing because it's just written. I want you just to see, and I'll translate for you. Okay, now I have to silence this. And here is what it says. This is breaking. Iran is doing a parade. استعراض صواريخ في طهران. A parade about its missiles in Tehran. Because that's what the Iranian military, it says الجيش الإيراني يخرج بآلياته إلى الساحة. The Iranian army has taken now its weapons out to the street to see. Of course, they're not going to show everything. And I just wanted to show you this one here. The next one I want to play for you is a statement by the Iranian Foreign Minister Sayyid Abbas Araghchi, or Dr. Abbas Araghchi. Very interesting. It's in English, so just take a listen. And what I want you to pay attention to is the requirement, what Iran is asking for. And I think, it's not I think, it's justly. Because if you go back 4 decades of sanctions, it'll make more sense to you. Let's take a listen, please.
Dude, guess how much it cost me to make sure my family gets $1 million if something ever happens to me? You'll never guess.
Will remain closed until the U.S. releases 11 trillion. Iran's foreign minister just said the Strait of Hormuz will remain closed until the U.S. releases $11 trillion in frozen Iranian assets. They say the ceasefire will end in the next 48 hours if they don't release the assets. Be sure to subscribe.
Okay. The other one, as I mentioned earlier, which I showed you a picture, is that Mr. Araghchi is in Moscow. Once again, the timing of it is very, very important. The next one I'm going to share with you is that about Iran. Yeah, we already did that one. I want to share with you something about China, which I found very interesting, the timing of it. Again, everything has to do with the timing. And it's in English. And once again, you have to keep in mind that North Korea is testing. Russia just tested something recently as far as some type of missile. And now you have the Chinese. Take a listen, please. It's in English anyway.
Pentagon is panicking over China's new ICBM. Meet China's DF-41. This monster of a missile is a solid-fueled road-mobile ICBM. That means it doesn't just sit in an underground silo. It constantly moves on massive 16-wheeled trucks, hiding in deep tunnel networks, ready to launch at a moment's notice. With a massive range of up to 15,000 kilometers, it can cover every single state in the USA. But here is the truly terrifying part. It doesn't just carry one warhead. The DF-41 can carry up to 10 independent nuclear warheads, flying at a blinding speed of Mach 25, striking completely different targets all at once. Plus, it drops fake decoys to completely confuse enemy missile defenses.
All right, and I give credit to Defense DEC. That's the clip I wanted to share with you. And the next one I'm going to share with you is the one about the foreign minister, or prime minister of Finland. The foreign minister, I'm sorry. Her name is Elena Valtonen. Let me show you a picture. I kind of read up on her a little bit. And she just issued a statement yesterday from Helsinki. Behind her is Kajas. She's the European Union foreign policy, which they're respectfully to women. I have great respect for ladies, but she's clueless about foreign policy. They're just not equipped with this. It was the same issue that I wrote an article a few months ago about the previous foreign minister of Finland. They made catastrophe. So what happened with this foreign minister? Her statement yesterday that now she's giving China an ultimatum. The foreign minister of Finland says that China ties with Russia are a disqualifying factor for any EU-China trade deal. No FTA talks, no negotiations, not unless China drops Russia, which is it not only is stupid on her part, it shows you the lack of depth of understanding. Europe needs China more than China needs Europe. That's one. Second, who was traveling recently to China? European heavy hitters. Is Finland a heavy hitter in Europe? No. Where the difference is that for the Finland, it has a veto power within the EU. That is where the difference. My point in this is that what this foreign minister, how clueless she doesn't realize, is that Finland today has fallen to the worst performing EU state. And you know why? Due to self-imposed sanctions on Russia. Because what happened? They have now a shortage in oil and gas. They have a decline in tourism. And the cities on the border with Russia shrinking away without spending visitors. And let alone there is one big issue that they have in Finland as we speak, is the highest unemployment in the European Union. And that's why I found she's so clueless into all this. Makes you just wonder. And the last one I want to share with you is from my fellow citizen, Jeffrey Sachs. I want you to take a listen and put it in perspective as to what the US is saying versus the reality. So take a listen to Professor Sachs.
The idea that America calls the shots from the world is wrong-headed, it's delusional, it's dangerous. And this was another example of that. It costs everybody when those delusions are put into practice. America is not all powerful. America is one of several superpowers, not alone. America is not unique in its power, and America can't dictate terms to other parts of the world that don't want to be dictated to. So this is basically the bottom line lesson. And in a way, it exposes a truth that is a truth that I hope American politicians come to understand, as well as the rest of the world will see.
Great insights. And by the way, I give credit to CGTN. There was a clip from that interview that I watched. It was a long one. It was an hour or so. So it was very, very interesting. In any event, I wanted to share that with you. And I'm going to just summarize what I talked about earlier. So, regarding the lies coming out of the Secretary of Defense, coming out of the President, regarding the destruction of the Iranian Navy, which has nothing to do with the truth. And by the way, when we think about just with the development of the missiles we talked about yesterday, you consider the distance between Israel and Iran. Iran doesn't need to deploy these long-range ones. Iran has the capability to hit Israel. As a matter of fact, Iran now it can hit Israel anytime it wants to, because they found out, meaning Iran, found out that the Iron Domes and David slings are useless in comparison to Iranian missiles. That is that's the harsh reality that Washington and Tel Aviv do not want to admit. That's why these two individuals are lost. Anyway, here is the thing. The facts are no longer in dispute. That's not even by the Pentagon own intelligence agency within, which is that's what the DIA is supposed to be, independent from the policy. Of course, you're not going to trust the IC in the US. Intelligence can be manipulated. I've seen it before. I've seen when some high-ranking will force analysts to change the wording on saying. So I'm not saying the IC is a saint. No, it's not. But at least for now, Even the Pentagon's own intelligence is contradicting what the Secretary is saying. So while you have the Secretary of Defense standing on the podium yesterday morning declaring Iran completely destroyed, and at the same time his boss, another liar, Trump, boasting of total victory, you have their own analysts, the ones in the White House and the ones in the Pentagon. We're quietly writing something completely different. Their reports suggesting a different story altogether. Half of Iran's missiles are still intact. As a matter of fact, I saw the number, 60%. Thousands of drones are still operational. And of course, we had a week and a half ago, so the F-15 down. You have now the mines still being laid in the Strait of Hormuz. So a blockade that, by their own admission, meaning the White House and the Pentagon, hasn't fully stopped Iranian oil from moving. And this isn't just about being wrong. No. I understand mistakes in a war can happen. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this is about a pattern. You know how you can detect a liar? You have to look just for the pattern. That's what we're talking about here. This is about a pattern, a deliberate, a repeated choice to tell the American people, and the world for that matter, you tell them one thing, while the classified briefings said another thing. And that gap in between, the narrative and reality, isn't just embarrassing, it's dangerous. And the reason it is dangerous is because decisions about war, ceasefire, diplomacy, and what have you, gets made based on what leaders claim is true, not what actually is. And in the case of Donald Trump, he has no way out. He was sucked in. Israel pulled him into the trap and let him figure it out. Because as of this moment, I'm talking to you, Iran is still standing. Iran is still armed. Iran still negotiating from a position of surprising strength. They hold the card. And the world, by the way, is watching to see whether Washington's next move is guided by facts or by the next press conference. That's what amounts to our dealings with global affairs, because we don't have substantive, qualified individuals with insights and substance in understanding the complexity of these issues. So I'm going to leave you with one question, like I always do. And I truly appreciate you answering those and leaving your feedbacks. And I know someone yesterday put a comment, oh, Dr. O, you don't read all of them. I did. And that was the reason why I answered that particular individual. So I will say straightforward, stop this nonsense. Okay, I have no tolerance for that. And if this is not at your level, then get out. Simple as that. We don't need individuals like that in this community. So here is the question for you. If the Trump administration knew Iran still has about 50 or 60% of its missile capabilities and thousands of drones remaining, but told the American people and the world for that matter otherwise, what else are they not telling us about this war? Fair question. So make sure you drop me your thoughts in the comment section. I would like to read yours.
Well, the future of the US dollar is changing, and trust me, after you watch today's video, you're going to understand why the Iran war is quickly turning China's currency into a major global player. because when chaos erupted in the Strait of Hormuz last month, doubling the price of crude oil in just a few short days, there was one currency that immediately became a viable alternative to the US dollar. And it wasn't the pound, euro, or Swiss franc. It was the Chinese renminbi. Just listen to US Senator Lindsey Graham admit this on live television.
As to the Strait of Hormuz, right now they're charging ships, the IRGC, the Iranians, to go through the straits, and they're taking the yuan, not the dollar. One threat of this whole debacle is if we start allowing the Chinese currency to be traded in oil, that will hurt the dollar. In 1974, every barrel of oil sold and traded in the world is traded in dollars. Now, what are the Iranians trying to do? They're trying to change the currency from a dollar to a Chinese yuan, and that's an attack on the dollar. And that needs to end too.
You see, there's a much bigger story unfolding in the Middle East than what most people realize. Up until now, the focus of the Iran war has been the US government's efforts to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, which of course was open for trade before the war started. But the Trump administration has made a colossal miscalculation. Trump admitted himself that he didn't think Iran would have the ability to close down the Strait of Hormuz. But the Wall Street Journal is now reporting that Iran has received its first revenue from the Hormuz toll. And once again, here's the main point. They are using the Chinese renminbi for payments. We need to answer 3 questions in today's video. Number 1, why did Iran choose China's currency? Number 2, how is Iran able to receive this RMB payment? And number 3, what does this mean for the future of the US dollar? Let's start today's analysis by looking at this incredible report from Bloomberg that says the quiet part out loud. The Iran war just broke the petrodollar. You see, our story today actually began in 1974, when then US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger brokered one of the most lucrative financial deals in modern history. Saudi Arabia agreed to price its oil exclusively in dollars and invest the surplus in US assets, most notably US Treasury bonds. By 1975, other Gulf states followed the Saudis' lead, and in exchange, the US government provided security guarantees and a stable global order. For the past 50 years, this petrodollar loop quietly subsidized America's borrowing costs and cemented the greenback's role as the world's reserve currency. But when Donald Trump launched his unprovoked war against Iran, on February 28th, 2 major things happened. The first was Iran closing down the Strait of Hormuz, something even Trump himself admitted he didn't think was possible. The second was Iran retaliating against the other Gulf states, striking them with missiles and immediately showing them that US security guarantees had failed. This absolutely enraged the government leaders of these Gulf states. For a clear example, just look at the comments from the government officials of the United Arab Emirates, who said, "It was President Trump's decision to attack Iran that entangled their country in a destructive conflict whose effects may not be over." Emirati officials told the US officials that if the UAE runs short on dollars, it may be forced to use China's yuan or other countries' currencies for oil sales and other transactions. Right now, the Chinese currency has a strategic advantage over the US dollar because China has been preparing for this opportunity for many years now and actually developed a digital version of their currency called the yuan, which moves over the blockchain. This technology integrates messaging, reconciliation, and asset transfer into a single, seamless operation, bypassing the United States-controlled SWIFT system. This is a major deal because SWIFT is controlled directly by the US government and gives the US government the ability to monitor all global financial flows. This is the exact reason why Iran chose the Chinese renminbi over other currencies, because by conducting trade in the yuan over the blockchain network, the Iranian government can process an unregulated amount of financial transactions, and there is not a single thing the US government can do to stop it or control it. You see, back in 2021, China launched a new digital financial project called mBridge with the governments of Hong Kong, Thailand, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. Of course, this payment platform receives very little coverage in traditional Western media, but the system has already processed over $55 billion worth of trade. And here's the main point I want you to remember. The yuan accounts for 95% of trade value. We are witnessing in real time the birth of an entirely new currency trading platform that does not use the US dollar, something the US government never dreamed would be possible. Now, to understand what this means for the global economy, I want you to take a look at this graph, which highlights transactions cleared through China's cross-border interbank payment system, or CIPS, which clears payments exclusively in yuan. The major breakthrough started in early 2022 with the start of the Ukraine war. Chinese yuan payments continued to increase in 23 and 24, right when the US government passed secondary sanctions on Russia. Throughout 2025, more global banks joined China's CIPS system, but in March, When the new Iran war began, KIPS handled a record 921 billion yuan. That's over $135 billion in average daily volumes, a near 50% jump from the previous month. If you remember one thing from today's video, I want it to be this. Iran now controls the Strait of Hormuz, and when 20% of the world's oil and gas can move through a digital pipe that the US Treasury cannot see, then America's dominance of global finance has effectively been handed an expiry date. To understand what I mean, just look at this chart, which should be alarming to anyone holding US dollar assets. The US dollar now represents just 40% of global currency reserves, the lowest amount in the last 20 years. The dollar has declined more than 18 percentage points over the last 10 years, as governments and smart investors are increasingly holding more alternative assets like gold and crypto. Every week, I receive emails from my followers asking me, how do you store assets like gold and crypto, and aren't you worried about safety? A lot of people talk about crypto security, but almost no one talks about the part that
actually in the Western Hemisphere south of us cut a trade deal with China. They're going to, from now on, do trade in their own currencies, get right around the dollar. They're creating a secondary economy in the world, totally independent of the United States. We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them.
Isn't that interesting? In just a few years, the US government won't even be talking about sanctions because so many countries around the world won't be using the US dollar to conduct trade anymore. To be honest, this is a huge win for many developing countries because economic sanctions often have a huge human toll. Just take a look at this study published by the Lancet Global Health, which outlines just how devastating economic sanctions can be for developing countries. Led by economist Francisco Rodriguez at the University of Denver, the team found that unilateral sanctions imposed by the US and EU since 1970 are associated with 38 million deaths. In some years, during the 1990s, more than 1 million people were killed. And in 2021, the most recent year of data, sanctions caused more than 800,000 deaths. So when you hear about economic sanctions being used as a tool of foreign policy, just remember, there is a real human cost to this type of warfare, and it's also why countries around the world actively seek out US dollar alternatives. Research shows sanctions reduce government revenue, weaken healthcare systems, and severely restrict access to medicine, food, and critical imports. And the people who suffer the most are the most vulnerable. Children under the age of 5 account for roughly half of all deaths linked to sanctions. This is something Iran has specifically battled for over 47 years, as the US government has actively sanctioned the country for nearly half a century, which is why the Iranian government immediately chose China's currency as the preferred alternative payment tool for passage through the Strait of Hormuz. But it's not just Iran. Earlier last week, it was announced that the UAE and China signed a new government pact to boost investment flows between the two countries. The UAE has always been considered a close ally of the United States, but the Emirates have chosen a new path forward, moving closer to China by signing a record 24 new trade deals with the Chinese government, spanning everything from economic, trade, and investment relations. Mohammed al-Suwadi, who is the Minister of Investment for the UAE, said this about the new deal with China. This agreement establishes a structured framework to unlock new investment opportunities, mobilize capital across priority sectors, including through our sovereign wealth funds, and deliver lasting value for both nations. Once again, we are seeing multiple nations across the world, all of whom are considered close US allies, remarkably shift closer to Beijing for a more secure future. This move from the Emirates follows the governments of Canada, the UK, Ireland, South Korea, and Spain, who have all sent their respective leaders to Beijing to personally meet with China's president and sign new trade deals to counter the United States under Donald Trump, which continues to be the largest source of geopolitical instability in the entire world. But to really show you how serious the Iran war is for the future of the United States and the dollar, you simply need to observe what's been happening with the US 10-year Treasury yield. Since the strike on Iran on February 28th, foreign central banks across the world have been selling US Treasuries for 8 consecutive weeks. Holdings at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York have dropped by roughly $82 billion and currently sit at their lowest level since 2012. Countries like Turkey, Thailand, and India are all dumping US Treasuries as developing countries across the world are caught in a difficult position. Oil priced in dollars has surged past $100 a barrel, and the only option for them to survive is selling their US Treasury holdings. We saw the exact same scenario play out in 2020 with the COVID pandemic, when foreign central banks sold a record $109 billion in treasuries, but the US Federal Reserve was able to control that crisis by offering countries a US dollar swap line, which is essentially insurance. Foreign central banks can get access to dollars without selling US treasuries in a fire sale. But the Iran war is categorically different because Gulf producers can't get their oil out. The Strait of Hormuz closure has stranded their barrels along with everyone else's. Henry Kissinger's petrodollar deal survived the Cold War, the Gulf Wars, the 2008 financial crisis, and the pandemic. But the Iran war is different and unfortunately shows no real signs of ending anytime soon. Just listen to this clip from Donald Trump.
How long are you willing to wait until you get a unified response?
Don't rush me, Jeff. So we were in Vietnam like for 18 years. We were in Iraq for many, many years. We're in for all the, I don't like to say World War II because that was a biggie, but we were 4.5, almost 5 years in World War II. We were in the Korean War for 7 years. I've been doing this for 6 weeks.
Well, we are actually entering week 9 of the war, and it's certainly not a good sign that Trump is bringing up the many years the United States was at war in Vietnam, Korea, and Iraq. At this point, it's painfully obvious that the U.S. will be involved for many more months, and potentially longer, as we are looking at a zero-sum game in the Middle East, with both the U.S. and Iran unwilling to compromise and give in to each other's demands. Interestingly enough, during the same interview, Trump admitted that he was close to a deal with Iran, a deal that everyone was happy with, but ultimately failed for one reason.
They would have opened it up 3 days ago. They came to us and they said, we will agree to open the strait. And all my people were happy. Everybody was happy except me. I said, wait a minute, if we open the strait, that means they're going to make $500 million a day. I don't want them to make $500 million a day until they settle this thing. So I'm the one that kept it closed. We have total control of it. And it'll open when they make a deal or something else happens that's very positive.
You now see how this story all ties back together. Iran has realized they have a tremendous amount of leverage on the entire global economy by controlling the Strait of Hormuz. And as Trump admitted, they can make $500 million a day by controlling the access point and charging passing ships a toll to go through this strait. Trump no doubt was unhappy with this deal because Iran has found a currency and a payment system that completely bypasses the US dollar. And if Trump agreed to that, it would be the end of the petrodollar system the US government has enjoyed since 1974. Everyone, the situation in Iran continues to change daily, but as always, you can count on this YouTube channel to provide you with the best geopolitical insights from some of the best insiders in the world. I recently sat down for an interview with University of Chicago professor Robert Pape, who reveals why the Iran war is accelerating as the US and Iran move further down the escalation trap. Click here to watch this.
The war that the United States and Israel launched against Iran has caused the largest global oil crisis in history, and we're just beginning to see the impact. This could cause a global economic crisis. So it's very important to understand what exactly is happening, and that's why we created this presentation today. Now, we are recording this analysis on the 24th of April, nearly 2 months into this war that was launched by the US and Israel on the 28th of February. And technically, there is a ceasefire that is temporary but has been extended, although this has been referred to as Schrodinger's ceasefire in a reference to the famous physics experiment of Schrodinger's cat, which is simultaneously alive and dead. The observer does not know until they actually open the box and observe what happens. So similarly, the ceasefire is simultaneously happening and not happening. The US has been constantly violating the ceasefire, and Israel. And one day Trump announces a naval blockade against Iran, and then he says the war is going to end. And this comes after the initial rounds of peace talks that were held between the US and Iran in the Pakistani capital of Islamabad failed. But regardless of what exactly the state of the war is, that is not super relevant to this analysis today, because even if there's a miracle and the war immediately ends, that does not mean the energy crisis is over. On the contrary, we are just seeing the beginning of the energy crisis unleashed by this war. And that crisis will go on for months, or even potentially, the chief of the IEA, the International Energy Agency, has warned that the economic impact of this energy crisis could be felt for years. Now, the IEA published a report in March that described this as, quote, the largest supply disruption in the history of the global oil market, end quote. It is even larger than the OPEC oil embargo in 1973 and the other oil crisis in 1979 that was caused by the Iranian Revolution. And both of those energy crises led to stagflation in the 1970s, by the way, which is simultaneous economic stagnation, low growth, or even a recession with inflation. Typically, when you have a recession, you have deflation. And when you have inflation, you have an overheated economy that is growing fast. Stagflation is the worst of both worlds. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to talk more about the impact on the global economy a bit later in this analysis today. First, I want to explain why the International Energy Agency has described this oil supply crisis as even worse than the crises of the 1970s. And this is because in response to the US-Israeli war of aggression, Iran took an extremely important decision to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Now, in the oil crises of the 1970s, this did not happen. This is the first time in modern history that Iran has taken advantage of its geopolitical position to close down this strait. So what exactly is the Strait of Hormuz? This has been described by the US government's Energy Information Administration, the EIA, as, quote, the world's most important oil transit choke point, end quote. Before the US launched this war, roughly 20% of all of the oil consumed around the world on a daily basis passed through this very narrow strait right off the coast of Iran. And this not only is significant because Iran is a major oil and natural gas producer, but also because many other oil and natural gas producers in the Persian Gulf region, the Gulf monarchies, they also rely on sending their oil and liquefied natural gas through this very narrow strait. So countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Qatar have found it very difficult to export a lot of their energy. And very few ships have been able to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. I'm looking at data here from Bloomberg, the US financial media outlet, and it only goes until early April. But you can see that before the US and Israel launched this war at the end of February, there were about 50 tankers going into and out of the Strait of Hormuz on a daily basis. After the US and Israel launched this war and in self-defense, Iran shut down the Strait of Hormuz, you can see that on a daily basis, there was a small handful of ships passing through that you can count on one hand. Although I should say that Iran did decide to make some exceptions. In particular, Iran allows tankers from countries that it considers friendly, that are not helping the West to wage war against it. For instance, China and India, along with Russia and Pakistan, have all been given the green light to send tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. However, Tehran has made a very important demand. It wants the oil that is passing through the strait to be sold in China's currency, renminbi or yuan, not US dollars, which is an extremely important geopolitical decision because this is a direct challenge to the global dominance of the US dollar via the petrodollar system. The fact that for a century now, the vast majority, nearly all of the global oil traded on the global market was traded in US dollars. And then those petrodollars were recycled into US financial markets, especially the stock market and the bond market, and also real estate that helps to inflate the value of real estate. And this keeps these massive bubbles in these US financial markets inflated, which makes rich people in the US even richer because 90% of stocks, roughly 90%, are owned by the richest 10% of the US population. However, with all of that said, the closure of the Strait of Hormuz not only hurts the United States, but many countries around the world. The fact that Iran took this very extreme decision to shut down the Strait of Hormuz is a reflection of the fact, it demonstrates that Iran was very concerned about its future. For Iran, this is an existential war. The US and Israel are trying to overthrow the Iranian government and carry out state collapse. This is why Iran decided to close the Strait of Hormuz. And Trump's announcement that the US military would blockade Iran's blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, to blockade the blockaders, this has only made the situation even worse and further destabilized global energy markets. And like I said, it's not only impacting the US and the petrodollar system, because oil is a global market, and in particular, the majority of the oil that transits the Strait of Hormuz actually goes to other parts of Asia. Of course, the so-called Middle East, what continent is it in? It's in Asia. It's West Asia. That's a more accurate term. And the oil in West Asia is largely shipped to East Asia and South Asia. So for instance, 38% of the oil that passes through the Strait of Hormuz goes to China, 15% goes to India, 12% goes to South Korea. It is true that the West is not very dependent on oil coming through the Strait of Hormuz. About 4% goes to Europe and only 2.5% goes to the US. However, as I'll explain later, this does not mean that this oil crisis is not hurting Europe and the US. Both are being very significantly impacted negatively and facing potential economic crises and energy crises due to this closure, because even though they don't get oil directly from the Strait of Hormuz, oil is traded on a global market. And when the price of oil skyrockets because of a supply shock, because of a shortage in supply, that impacts every country on Earth. I'll talk about that in a few minutes here. First, I want to talk a bit more about how this energy crisis is impacting Asia, because this is the region of the world that has been the most hurt by this war started by the US and Israel. In particular, East Asia and Southeast Asia, because these are regions that do not have lots of domestic oil supplies. China, for instance, does have some domestic oil production. It's a significant oil producer, but it has 1.4 billion people, so it still imports a lot of oil. Japan consists of a series of islands. It has basically no domestic oil production, and Japan imports 95% of its oil from the Persian Gulf. Japan does have a stockpile, but regardless, you can see how this is an extreme crisis for Japan. Similarly, South Korea gets 70% of its oil from this region. The situation in Southeast Asia is even more desperate. The Philippines, which is one of the poorest countries in the region, imported 98% of its oil from the Persian Gulf, basically all of it. And this is why the Philippines was the first country on earth to officially declare a national emergency. And the Philippines and other countries in Southeast Asia that are dependent on oil imports have already reduced the workday to 4 days a week. They've reduced school days. They've told some government workers to work from home. They've cut back public transportation. They're rationing energy. This is a massive crisis. And like I said, it is not only hurting Asia. Europe has also been acutely affected by this war started by the US and Israel, because Europe is another region of the world that is very dependent on importing its energy. And EU officials have actually already warned that they're going to have to implement policies to cut back use of oil. And they're even discussing rationing, which would make it difficult for many people to buy gasoline, if they can even afford gasoline, or petrol, as it's called in the UK, because first of all, the price has skyrocketed. But second of all, even if they have the money, they might not be able to buy it because of rationing. And this not only impacts the global energy market, but also the global food market. And a UN agency warned that this US-Israeli war in Iran could cause a catastrophe in global food production, because the Persian Gulf region produces many of the chemical compounds that are used in fertilizers, like urea, for instance. And now many farmers around the world, especially in the global south, cannot get access to fertilizers. And this comes during planting season. So this means that a few months from now, we're going to start seeing shortages of food. We're not seeing this immediately, but in a few months, the farmers who are not able to get the fertilizer they needed to plant their crops now, in a few months, their harvests are going to be much smaller, which means there are going to be food shortages, which means that the price of food is going to increase drastically all around the world. And that means that global south countries are potentially going to have mass hunger, because poor people in global south countries are not going to be able to pay the higher prices. And food is largely traded by these commodity traders on the global market, and they're going to prioritize selling that food to richer countries where consumers have higher disposable income. Although even average consumers are going to feel the impact, even in wealthier countries in the global north, because they're going to have significant inflation. Their purchasing power is going to fall. So once again, this war that the US and Israel launched against Iran is having a massive impact on the global economy in many sectors. And we're just beginning to see the impact now in April, 2 months later. And months from now, it's likely going to be even worse. So I've talked about the impact on Europe, the impact on Southeast Asia, on Japan and South Korea. I also want to spend a minute or two here talking about the impact on China. Of course, China is the second most populous country on earth with 1.4 billion people. And China is the largest trading partner of most countries on earth, including the Persian Gulf region. And China is the biggest oil importer on earth. So obviously, one would expect that this US-Israeli war would hurt China. However, that said, China has been preparing for a potential crisis like this for months, if not years. Let's not forget the US and Israel launched the so-called 12-day war against Iran in June 2025. And following that war, China suspected the US and Israel would launch another war. So China began to stockpile oil. It didn't start in 2025, but it significantly increased its purchases of oil, which, by the way, is what a government should do when the global price of oil is low. You're supposed to buy low, not buy when the price is high, which now many countries that don't have oil in their stockpiles, they're freaking out and trying to buy oil when the price is significantly higher. China has reserves of roughly 1.2 or 1.3 billion barrels of oil. And that means that China has roughly 4 months worth of its oil imports in its stockpile. However, no one knows when exactly this war will end. I certainly hope that 4 months from now, and well before then, this war will end. But even if the war does end much sooner than that, as I've been stressing, the energy impact here is going to be felt for months, if not years, because some of the oil and natural gas infrastructure in the Persian Gulf has been damaged or destroyed in this war, and it will take months, if not years, to rebuild it. And even if the infrastructure has not been destroyed, many of the Persian Gulf countries have cut back their production of oil because they don't have enough storage capacity. And you can't just magically increase and decrease oil production by several million barrels of oil per day. Once you decrease oil production, it takes you several weeks, if not well over a month, to ramp up that production to the previous levels. This infrastructure is very complex. It's not like an on and off switch for your lighting in your house. But anyway, getting back to the issue of China and how the energy crisis is impacting China, I need to stress that another reason why China has not been as greatly hurt by this oil crisis is simply because in recent years, China has been diversifying its energy sources, and China has now become the world leader in renewable energy technology. In fact, Yale University estimated that China is building twice as much wind and solar power capacity as the rest of the world combined. Every year, China adds more solar power capacity than all of the West has ever installed. Moreover, if you've been to China, if you've been to a tier 1 major city like Beijing or Shanghai or Shenzhen, if you go out on the road and you look at the license plates of cars, you can see that about half of the cars, if not more, are electric vehicles. They have a green license plate. EVs have become extremely popular in China. China has more than 100 EV companies. And this means that China now needs to import less oil for gasoline. It still uses oil for industrial purposes, but China's been electrifying its vehicles and many other parts of the economy, which of course also helps to combat climate change. And China's carbon emissions have already peaked and they're going to be falling from now. But it's not just an issue of climate change and pollution, which is another problem. A decade ago, China had very bad pollution and it's gotten better. But it's not just because of these environmental reasons, but also a national security issue and an energy security issue. China recognizes that the more renewable energy capacity it has, the less dependent it is on foreign energy imports. And this war that the US and Israel launched against Iran is a great example of why China has been trying to focus on increasing domestic renewable energy production for national security reasons. But with all of that said, I now want to talk about the impact on the United States, the country that started this crisis in the first place in a totally unnecessary war of aggression in violation of international law. Now, the rhetoric coming out of the Donald Trump White House has been very misleading, and I thought it would be very important to correct what Trump has been claiming. Trump insists that the U.S. is energy independent, and Trump supporters keep repeating this falsehood. It's simply not true. Trump also claimed that the U.S. does not depend on energy coming from the Middle East, from West Asia. Therefore, he claims the U.S. will not be adversely impacted by the war he started against Iran. This is completely false because even though the U.S. only gets 5% of its oil imports from Saudi Arabia, the price of oil is global and the U.S. imports 8 million barrels of oil per day. So it doesn't matter if the U.S. is not importing that oil from West Asia because U.S. oil importers still have to pay more money because the price of oil is global and the price of crude has skyrocketed due to this U.S.-Israeli war. But regardless, the point that I'm going to conclude with today, the most important point you should all take away from this analysis, is that this war that the U.S. and Israel launched against Iran could cause a global economic crisis. I'm looking here at a paper that was published by the group Oxford Economics, warning that this war could cause a global recession. And as I mentioned earlier, this could bring back stagflation, which was a devastating feature of the 1970s, which is simultaneous economic stagnation or even recession, so very low growth rates or negative growth rates, in addition to simultaneous inflation, stagflation, stagnation plus inflation. This would be catastrophic for countries around the world because it means that average people's wages, their purchasing power in real terms will be falling, while at the same time, there are fewer jobs. There are fewer economic opportunities. Stagflation is the worst of both worlds, and this war could very well cause a significant crisis of stagflation. This is why I thought it would be so important to make this presentation to help people understand how the US-Israeli war against Iran is truly a global conflict that will impact countries and people all around the world. This is not isolated to Iran. This is not isolated to West Asia. This will have a huge impact on your country, wherever you're living, on your economy, on your energy market, on your food market, and on your standard of living. On that note, I will conclude. I am Ben Norton. I am the editor-in-chief of Geopolitical Economy Report. I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Please like and subscribe. Please share this. I will see you all next time.
Tehran was almost made uninhabitable by drought, and the drought was engineered in part by U.S. radar systems that were blasting energy to ionize the atmosphere to steer clouds away from Iran and to actually cause a drought. It's just classic geoengineering, multiple ways to achieve this. But what has happened is that since those large radar installations around the Persian Gulf have been destroyed by Iranian drones, the rains have returned.
Remember what Zygmunt Brzezinski said, who was the advisor to Jimmy Carter. He started the Trilateral Commission. He's the father of Mika Brzezinski on Morning Joe Ball. And
Big News, I think is how you pronounce it. It's Big News Brzezinski.
He said technology will make available to the leaders of major nations techniques for conducting secret warfare, of which only a bare minimum of the security forces need be appraised. Techniques of weather modification could be employed to produce prolonged periods of drought or storm. Well, son of a gun, we've got evidence that that's exactly what they've been doing in Iran. Iranian expert accuses U.S. Israel of weather manipulation to deepen the drought. An Iranian water resource specialist has accused the United States and Israel of manipulating regional weather patterns to intensify Iran's severe drought. According to the Middle Eastern Media Research Institute, they claimed in a July 30th interview on the Iranian YouTube channel that both nations had been deliberately diverting clouds away from Iran for over 4 decades.
Well, that's a violation of the treaty not to do that, Jimmy.
That is. There's a treaty, international treaty that was signed in the 70s that made it illegal, or they all agreed to not use weather modification.
Because we did it in Vietnam, too.
Because we did it in Vietnam. Iran's rain clouds aren't being stolen, but its drought is worsening. So the establishment media comes out, immediately tries to make you think that's wrong, that's not happening, because that's what the establishment media does.
Is Iran being forced to use their plague of bees weapon on Israel in retaliation?
Iran's embassy in Kabul posted a strange tweet. They say in it, after Iran destroyed the secret center for cloud seeding and weather manipulation in the United Arab Emirates, everything changed overnight. And with the end of the secret center, the region's weather map flipped completely. So it's raining so much, their reservoirs were down to 1%. They were thinking they would have to move people out of Tehran, a city of 9 or 10 million people. They had to move. They were going to move everybody because they had no water. But now we opened the gates of Iraq's largest dam due to 100% capacity. The dam hasn't reached 100% capacity in years. Underground water sources have started to overflow, and this is what it looks like. That's what it looks like now in Iran. Water everywhere. Water coming up from under the ground. And here, Iran destroyed American. So when Iran hit, they say they destroyed their weather modification plants, right? When Iran was hitting all the Gulf states, because we had bases there. And then they also took out their weather modification. This is what the reporting is, right? So I can't, nobody can confirm this for sure, but this is certainly what it looks like, and especially after Iran Kabul tweeted that out. Here's what Tucker Carlson and our good friend Dane Whittington had to say about it.
And Tucker, they're being used as a form of warfare. And we know that. We have countries like Iran, constantly demonized, of course, as you well know. Immediately after 9/11, we have the list of countries to be targeted given to General Wesley Clark, a list that clearly existed before 9/11 even occurred. Subsequently, every one of those countries, every one of them endured a once in 1,000 year drought. Statistically, mathematically, that's impossible without climate intervention operations. And we have the leader of Iran on the floor of the UN, on film, on the record, stating NATO was cutting off their precipitation. We have Iranian top scientists recently stating NATO's been doing this for 40 years. Destabilize the food supply by destabilizing the rain, and you destabilize the population.
Here's more from Dane.
I'm saying that we know the technology exists to steer storms of that size. So why would we think they're not using these type of operations? We have historical precedent. Project Popeye in Vietnam was so successful at controlling precipitation. By 1976, they passed the INMOD treaties forbidding weather manipulation for wartime purposes, but not over a country's own population. The Chinese government has long since openly stated they were engineering snowstorms with endothermic reacting elements. These are patented elements that can literally transition a rain event into snow. They were so successful in China, they cost billions of dollars of damage to Beijing, at which time they began to be less open about this. Everybody covered it. CNN, Popular Science, The Guardian. But if you bring that up here, suddenly you're a tinfoil hat wearing nutcase.
We'll be right back with more of this story after a brief message from our sponsor. All right, quick break to talk about something I've just started using, Rumble Wallet. If you've ever been curious about buying and investing in crypto, Bitcoin, stable coins, USAT, or even terms at wallet.rumble.com. And if you want to hear testimony in Congress, this is real. This is from C-SPAN. Here's testimony in Congress.
Thank you, Senator. The Air Force has gotten great value out of HARP in the past. So we took over from the.
So he's talking about HARP. That's the program to do weather modification and shoot energy into the ionosphere.
We managed it and actually did a number of experiment campaigns up there and have finished our work that we were interested in doing up there. We've moving on to other ways of managing the ionosphere, which the HARP was really designed to do, was to inject energy into the ionosphere to be able to actually control it. And but that work has been completed.
Mr. Fletcher, another question on the.
So they got it figured out how to control the ionosphere. That's just what he just said. Okay, here's more.
In an interview with the Los Angeles Times on April 21st, you said that you told the Associated Press that the American government has created weather tampering techniques so that the New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans and to control the rest. Would you explain what you were trying to say?
Well, what I was trying to say is exactly what I said. There is weather control techniques. We have a complete package on that, which I did not bring, but I certainly will see to it that it is brought in for the record. Number one, the entire patents on the equipment. Number two, Senator Claiborne Pell's complete statement and story of his own that not only does it exist, but that we even utilize it as far back as the Vietnam War. You might want to touch base with Senator Pell.
I just want to repeat before I turn to
yes, but we do have all that information.
You're saying the government has created weather tampering techniques so that the, quote, New World Order will be able to starve millions of Americans.
Worldwide.
Millions of Americans, and to control the rest.
Yes, sir. And that's my belief. As bizarre as that sounds, if somebody had told me that equipment even existed 10 years ago, I would have thought they were nuts, sir. And at this point in time, we have all the documents to prove it. And if you think that 85 tornadoes takes place in the middle of our growing area by simultaneous accident, I'm sorry. With the equipment that's already set up internationally, and as bizarre as that is, it is proven and documented. We will supply you with those documents. As bizarre as that is, I would say that weather wars, and this is quoting actually Senator Claiborne Pell himself, that they are the greatest weapon ever created in the world, and that's the senator's own statement. So yes, I have to do stand on that.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Thank you.
Here's a little bit more.
Geoengineering allows militaries to command and control the battlefield, to throw communication signals much further and more efficiently in an ionized atmosphere. So power, profit, and then the most troubling one, and this is very hard for people to get
population control.
What we might call population control.
To control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
So that's LBJ. Yeah. He who controls the weather will control the world.
It dawned on me many years ago that the official story we've been presented with about what is called climate change, it seems to be incomplete at best. Few in the civil sector fully understand that geoengineering is primarily a military science and has nothing to do with either cooling the planet or lowering carbon emissions. When they say we're waging war on carbon dioxide, they're literally, as you just said, waging war on life itself. This transhumanist impulse to merge the human species with the machines and technologies that we've created. Breathing consciously and strategically is the portal into more mindfulness. I think really awakening to our potential as humans. For those humans who don't believe, as you said earlier, in geoengineering, please understand that there are literally tens of thousands of pages of public records all over the world indicating ongoing weather manipulation and climate modification projects for almost 100 years.
So there you go.
You know, you may not be aware of this, but Tehran was almost made uninhabitable by drought. And the drought was engineered in part by US radar systems that were blasting energy to ionize the atmosphere to steer clouds away from Iran and to actually cause a drought. It's just classic geoengineering, multiple ways to achieve this. But what has happened is that since those large radar installations around the Persian Gulf have been destroyed by Iranian drones, the rains have returned. And now in the last week or so, we have really record rains in Tehran and what was almost uninhabitable. I mean,
So I don't know how much more you need to hear about this, but it's real. It happened. We've already used it, Operation Popeye, that everybody knows, which led to a treaty in the 70s saying we wouldn't use this anymore. And you don't have a treaty for a weapon system that doesn't exist. You have a treaty for a weapon system that not only exists, but it's already been used and proven that it works. And we did it in Vietnam, and we've been doing it. Why do you think they ever stopped? Because they didn't, and they've ramped it up. Okay, that's it. We
Cool. Follow me.